Hello, everyone. Long time since we've done one of these call-ins. Let me know how my audio sounds because I am now a professional podcaster, and so I have one of these fancy arms, and so I don't know if my mic is a little closer to the screen than normal. But so yeah, this is going to be kind of a little bit of a catch-up stream. Excuse me. Hope you all had a good Christmas. I, like everyone else in the world, got sick over the holidays, so I'm a little bit low energy. But nonetheless, I had a good holiday. Obviously, I got a new podcast or a new microphone arm, so I'm pretty excited about that because it's really decluttered my desk compared to my super ghetto setup before. But yeah, so I just let people kind of trickle in, and I realized actually while I'm doing this, I will promote this on Twitter because I guess I'm supposed to do that. And I'm just kind of waffling while I give time people to come into the stream. Anyway, yeah. So I'm looking forward to talking to you guys. Yeah, I see Samuel in the chat, and there's some other guys waiting to come back on. After a little bit. Oh, Doug Dimmadone. I've been doing this for literally 3 minutes, so don't worry, you haven't missed much. But yeah, I've had so far a good Christmas. I got to see some family I hadn't in a while. It was kind of interesting because it was definitely the more politically progressive part of my family, so that was kind of fun. With family, I maintain a strict non-political stance, but nonetheless, you still interact with some interesting people and some interesting opinions. Yeah, I'm also, before we get into this, I'm going to double check because I think I have some super chats from my stream with Pete. I think you guys are going to be excited. I've done a lot of work in the background, and I plan on making this podcast a little more professional and a little bit more, I guess, a little bit more of a production, So there's some things that are being coming out. Oh, how long do I extend the stream to last? I don't know, maybe like an hour or two. Kind of depends on how many people want to come in and talk. I've already got 2 in the chat, but if anyone else wants to pop in, the StreamYard link that's pinned on the YouTube comments, you can just hop in directly there. Or if you want, I've got my public Telegram linked in the comments, and you can find it there as well. And also just find me, shit posting there. But anyway, what I meant to say is that the podcast should be, improving a good bit. So as you can see, I've got some new art, and that art reflects kind of a broader push. Like I'll be launching, a website soon. I'll be kind of rebranding my look, with some art I actually own. Lou Templar or Cringewalker, who runs, what is the name of that? He's the guy who does all the cool, AI art for the Restoration Bureau. He whipped this up for me, which is really kind of him. So the whole look of it should be changing. It'll be more professional. I'll also be moving to a much more regular schedule. So I'll probably be trying to hit 2 times a week, schedule TBD. And I'm also going to be leaning much more into my audio only show. So obviously this is my YouTube audience, but I would recommend heading over to Spotify, heading over to Apple, because I think I'm going to run a little bit of a promotion. And this is, I guess, my first time announcing it. Where if you send me a screenshot on Twitter or Telegram of you giving me a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify, I think I'm going to give a prize. I might give like a gift card to Imperium Press or something. So if you want a chance to win that, I'll just DM me, proof of you reviewing my podcast well, because it's not buying a review. I'm just showing how much I appreciate your reviews. But anyway, man. Henrik Johansson, did you eat any Swedish Christmas food? A little bit. So because it's kind of last Christmas before I get married, my fiance and I obviously had had Christmas together, but immediately afterwards, she went to go visit her big Swedish family in Chicago. And I went to go visit, some of my extended family. And so most of the food that we had was just kind of, we ate well, but it was more, kind of like traditional Anglo food. And then they saved the smorgasbord and, the peppercocker and all that for the meeting in Chicago. But anyway, I'm probably going to bring on the first guest. So I'm going to bring on, I don't know how to say his name, but he goes by KJ on Telegram. Say, hey man, how you doing?
Oh, how's it going? Can you hear me pretty good?
Yeah, I can hear you a whole lot better now.
Okay, sweet. Yeah. So I just go by Yala or Yalathano. It was a
Oh,
pretty old. It was one of my first gaming names, and just kind of stuck.
where do you get your PFP from? Because I think it's really cool looking.
So I I found it. He was the Japanese. He's a Japanese artist, and he did all the cover art for the Star Wars movies. But then he also did some futuristic like military stuff. Um, and I just saw this, and it was like epic. Like it's just epic, and I just picked it. My old one was actually it's the Vincent Van Gogh painting of the skull smoking a cigarette, and that was kind of cool until I saw a bunch of other people using it. I'm like, well, it's too old. Got to find something new.
Yeah, I like the look of it a lot. I didn't realize that he was the guy. Now looking at it, I see the similarity to the the Japanese Star Wars cover, which is just a really cool movie poster. And I'm not a huge like films guy or anything.
Yeah, I mean, it was so profound that it gets aped to this day, not just in the Star Wars franchise, but like just the design. I mean, you'll see it like the Avengers, and then even like I think they had one for like Zelensky or something. They just aped the design. It's kind of sad, honestly.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's one of those things. I kind of feel like the Matrix is the same way, where things become so iconic that, especially in like the current era, you've almost seen more derivative versions of it, you know,
Yeah,
than you have the original. So it kind of cheapens the original piece. But I know what you mean. Actually, if you can give me like a second, I'll pull up the Star Wars cover or the Japanese cover for Star Wars because it's really cool
yeah.
looking.
Well, I think he did both. I don't want to say for sure, but he was the artist who did most of the art for the advertising. But he did his own stuff too, which I got this from. There's some other really cool futuristic like military art he did. Like the full picture of this is epic. Like it's like Vietnam Marines, like skeleton soldiers, like on the surface of the moon or something.
Yeah, that's super rad. So anyway, man, is there anything in particular you wanted to talk about, or do you just want to hang out for a little bit?
So actually, yeah, I could go in a lot of ways, but I think I want to go off just like family and knowing where you're from. Like I kind of not struggle with this, but I've been thinking a lot about this. So I just got back from a semester abroad. I was studying in Germany, and before that, I'd always thought, yeah, it'd be kind of cool to go live in Germany. But I realized that like I'm not German. Like it's not my home. It's not my home. Like my home is the Midwest. Like no matter where I go in my life, I want to end up back here. Um, and I actually asked one of my friends, he's in the Marines, and we'd gone to high school together, and I hadn't seen him. I reached out to him on Instagram. I asked him the same question, like, and he said, yeah, like no matter where he goes, he wants to end up back basically where he belongs. And just the idea of having a home and being firm in that identity. Um, like the recent Dreyer article that he put out is just the perfect example. Like he's completely rootless, like a man who he's not only like self-hating, but like it's just self-hating in like the worst way. Like he doesn't just hate himself; he hates his roots. He hates who he is. And
Well,
there's a
and
point where you just have to accept like who you are. Like you are where you are. You are a unique individual. Like you're put into the time you were put for a reason, and either you lose that reason or you reject like yourself. Like
yeah, I know what you mean.
you can
And
jump in, yeah.
I've said, and I know that there's a lot of popular demand. Well, a lot, as much as there can be for a YouTube channel with 2,500 subs, but for more stuff covering Dreyer. But I kind of feel like at a certain point I've reached the limit of what I can say on him. But that is the hypocrisy in it that makes it so irritating. Is that he's written books about like strong local communities, building up a strong family unit to counter totalitarianism. But while saying that out of one side of his mouth, he's continually, savaging his people, the people who are, who he shares roots with. And so myself, like everyone else, is continually like, well, okay, man, like if you think this, then actually do it. So for a little bit of context, guys, Dreyer, or as Gio started calling him, the D Man, which I guess we'll go with, basically found out that his late father in the 1960s was a member of the Klan, right? And of course, it's him just hand-wringing about how terrible it is, how awful it is. And again, it's what you would expect. But there's a couple things in it that are, I don't know, kind of interesting. And one of them, he goes on a long digression about how he could never understand how his father, his horrible racist father, was way more comfortable around black people than he was.
Yeah.
One of those like many such cases things where it's like, yeah, pretty much. The big city, the redneck kid who goes off to journalism school, is is still uncomfortable around the decivilized subpopulations, so to speak. But yeah, no, I know what you mean, and it's overall frustrating with him. But I think that you're dead on the fact that like, and there's been a lot of conversation recently about like, well, what do you think is the best piece of content made in this year? Oron had a couple people on, and I was listening to that on my drive back up, from seeing family. And I think it was Bog Beef and one of the other guys basically said that Conscious Caracal's Digging Trenches article, which I've linked on this channel before, and you guys can find that out. I think it's on IM 1776 or Chronicles. I can't remember. One of those two publications. But he basically made that point. He's like, look, like, you are where you're from. That there is there is both a blood and a soil aspect to belonging somewhere. And that doesn't go away when that place starts to suck. That's when it needs you. And so I think you're dead right. And I think one of the other things that I like, because I'm very much a localist at heart, is that the libtards have kind of ruined tolerance in a sense. And people have really lost sight of the fact that people from different places are just different, and that's okay. Like, I'll be perfectly honest. I don't understand the Midwest. I get the appeal of some of it, like maybe, but it's not my place. It's not where I belong. And so like I can enjoy it there, but I don't need to get it for it to still be a place that people love.
Yeah. So like I've sort of noticed like you always have that like liberal view of basically the flyover states, right? I mean, they fly over from one side to the other side and they look down, it's just boring. It's not their home, but it's more than that. It's a condescension. But I find, I mean, even with like the old Glory Club itself, there's not a place in it for me as it stands. Like I know that Stephen, or what's his name, Radical Liberation, I think he's from Missouri, and I would say that's sort of on the edges of what I'd call like my stomping grounds, essentially. And it's very different, but there's not a place in there for me, and that's okay. That's perfectly fine. It's just, I find there's two different things that happen. So on the right, you have a very hyper localized view of like the myth of the founding fathers is the American myth. And I would agree, but it's not my myth in the sense that literally I don't have relatives who my ancestors didn't come from there. I can go down, right now I could drive down to see the town that my ancestors founded. It goes back to the 1850s. I can see their gravestones and they're still written in German. But this, like, the Midwest doesn't have that. It's been very deracinated through a lot of what happened during the 1920s, and then after the Civil Rights Act and the relocation of people north. So you have that, and you also have my biggest gripe with like people like BAP, essentially, is the view where you pretty much reject your homeland and you just become very rootless. So you have the Rod Dreyer rootless type where you just eat oysters and act like a nerd all day. And then you have the type who just goes around and, you don't build a family. You're not sure you're living a very aesthetic lifestyle, but you're not building anything, Who will remember you? Who will go to your grave to see you? Like, you won't have kin. You might have kin now, but you don't promote them. You don't wear it on your sleeve as a badge of honor. You're just, I don't know. And like him, I don't know. Like, there's a lot of stuff around him, but I find it kind of dangerous. This goes back to something that I think the distributist talks about. I really like listening to him. He's not really my people. He's very much a blue stater. But I can still understand where he's coming from, in that at some point you need to be founded based in reality. And that reality isn't just like the natural world. It's your people. You aren't an online creature. Yeah. And like for the online creature thing, you see this happen on the right and the left. Like on the right, you see this in like kids my age. Like I went through a stage where it's like, okay, today I'm going to be a libertarian, and then tomorrow you can change your identity and ideology to whatever you want. And even though some of those were legitimate things, but they were based in the time that they existed in. Like today, there isn't an actual like Marxist communist movement, just as much there isn't a Marxist movement because those or Maoist movement, mind me, because those are very particularized to both their time and their place. Like I could LARP as if I was like a I don't know, like a German in the 1930s, but I'm not. Like I am not. I'm a Midwesterner. I mean, you can appreciate the aesthetics, but you should never try to bring it into reality. And of course, we see this. We dunk on the left all the time because they just move to the body. Like, yeah, I can be whatever I want by just changing my identity. Both of these are symptoms of like the times we live in and just a really disconnection from what it means to be who you are.
Well, I completely agree. And the thing I always say about, and I just feel like I repeat myself over and over again, is that a big part of this is kind of a downstream consequence of liberalism that we're all dealing with. Sorry, just muting myself to cough. And that's the idea that essentially your identity is a choice, right? The very concept of a social construct is the idea, or social contract is the idea that, well, it's legitimate because I consent to it. Like I affirm this. And the problem is, it's like, well, if that's just a conception that kind of floats out in the ether, okay, so be it. But the problem is that's kind of affected us all to the point where it's very, very difficult to have a true identity. Every one of us is kind of this atomized being. And so instead of having a baseline identity that we default to, and we could conceptually choose something else, we essentially have no identity, which is, an incredibly integral part of what it means to be human. And we're essentially sitting there, in the ashes, so to speak, all scrambling around for anything at all to kind of tie ourselves to. And I think that's where a lot of the LARPing comes from. And I
mean, it's people searching to bring up. Have you read The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot?
Yes, I have.
Yeah, so I read that. It was part of my English class. I think it was my second semester in college, and that I really love that. I mean, it's so good, especially once you get into the references and everything. But it reminds me of the scene of it's like a field of like the field of broken images essentially, and like we are the generation that's going around and trying to put them back together. But what you get is things that aren't real. I mean, you get like portraits that are half of one person, half another one. It's like those AI images where it's nothing, but it looks like something.
Yeah, I very much know what you mean. And it's a hard problem because I kind of have a little bit of sympathy for the LARPers to a certain degree, because at a certain level, we're kind of all LARPing, to one degree or another.
Yes.
Because we don't really have the default option doesn't work, right? Like just going along to get along is not, all of us here, whatever our like proscriptive version of the future, agree that just, the standard kind of like, culturally accepted path is not a viable one. We've all accepted that premise. And so we don't really have, a convenient, like ready-made solution to that. And to be honest, if you're going to try anything new, like whether it be a job or a profession or a relationship, it kind of all starts with a little bit of LARPing. Like you kind of have to pretend your way into being the real thing. And
yeah, like to go back to Eliot, like you have to draw, like tradition exists and you have to draw from it, but you aren't recreating the tradition. You're not like LARP, like everything begins with kind of a LARP, but eventually will actually turn into that thing. And it's that slow. It's the moment where you realize, yeah, we aren't LARPing. Like a really good example, actually, from where I live is, I mean, polka music is very big, right? But polka music in Germany and in Europe died out. I think back in like the 1850s. It was a passing fad. But it became known here as like that's traditional music, you know. So like you'll go to a wedding and you'll play Roll Out the Barrel, and it's very strange because you think about it for a bit, and you're like this isn't real, but it very much is real.
No, I know what you mean. And it's the other problem that we're also in a crisis of sincerity to a certain sense, that like,
Yeah,
there's this
especially
like,
our generation.
oh yeah, there's this like poisonous irony of like never quite really doing something. And the problem is it's like, it's very easy to essentially like denigrate people who are trying something sincerely as just pure LARPing. You know, and that doesn't mean that LARPers don't exist. You know, there aren't these people who essentially just like try on something as kind of like a part of their personal brand, so to speak.
Yeah.
And there's this other problem, and I think that because I've been thinking a lot, and I need to just talk to this guy because do you remember the Anglo Ortho arc? This was about a month ago.
I tried. I dodged that bullet. It was way too much time
enough
to invest, but I'm familiar with what happened.
So yeah, so I was, you know, a big fan of this guy's work, and you know, it was very impactful to me. And when he came back, he was, you know, saying some things that I fundamentally disagreed with. But the problem is he was right about a lot of things. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that he's completely right about is the idea that, you know, there's never that like the production of, you know, new ideas and new cultures is always a synthesis, you know, and the problem is like we're never, at least in our lifetimes, going to escape kind of like the values that we grew up with and the culture we grew up with.
I would say there's like one exception though. Okay. If you look at a lot of philosophers, especially on the right, but this exists also on the left, but they essentially, it's almost like, and thus spoke Zarathustra, like they ascended to such a point that they couldn't return, that they forgot like who they were. Who's the guy the French guy, what's his name? He became a Sufi Muslim, right?
Guénon,
like him. I mean, Evola to some extent, Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, like they got so deep in the, like, lost in the sauce, and like, yes, like what they wrote is very impactful, but like you shouldn't try to become them. It's a very lonely path that very few go, and it's a very good thing, because like a society where everybody does that it doesn't work. You need normal people, you know. You need those people who like don't care about the news and just watch football.
Well, no, I largely agree with you. I just meant that I meant maybe a more constrained point, which is essentially just the fact that, like, much like, you know, Moldbug told us that essentially you can never be a true atheist. You know, you're always a Christian atheist, Jewish atheist, you know, a Catholic atheist. That because we are to a certain degree reacting to, you know, kind of like modern progressivism, it does kind of live rent free in our head. And I don't mean to say that in like a sense that like, oh, you know, like that means we're wrong. It's just that I don't think we can really escape the kind of like rootless ashes, you know, situation that we found ourselves in. You know, like that, I don't think you can, much like you said, you can't really go back from that. You know, the genie's out of the bottle. But I do think that, and this is kind of what I consider our mission more broadly, is to, you know, create a world in which people don't have to live in kind of a poisoned iron, you know, an irony poisoned world where they can have kind of like real and genuine identity. Because to be honest, I wish I could, but I don't know if that will ever be me. You know, I almost like I know too much to a certain point. Like I've been too, you know, kind of like poisoned by modern culture. I've been too poisoned by, you know, the internet, and I've done it to myself, to be honest. But nonetheless, I think that
you like, we have to be the like the crier in the desert who calls out like the prophecy, knowing he'll never see it. Essentially.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. It's maybe we should be looking more at John the Baptist and less at Charlemagne, if you will.
Yeah. I mean, there will be a Charlemagne, but you'll never know the day and the hour if that'll be you or won't. You just have to keep moving. And like, so it goes all the way.
This is one of my more black-pilled thoughts. There's a part of me that wonders if we already got our Caesar, and our Caesar was FDR, and he just fucked everything up. You know, he was just an evil Caesar, and now we kind of like had a speed run through the empire. but that's just something I think about maybe when it's things are getting a bit grim.
Well, I guess I don't know. Maybe I'll wrap it up with this one. So it actually goes back to the distributist. I remember I first started listening to him, and he was probably the first one who sort of snapped me out of it. Like I was kind of a normie con until 2018. I went to TPUSA, did their summer action or student action summit, and that sort of left me thinking, what in the world's going on? And then I found like Moldbug and all them, and sort of started reading. But he really got me into it, and I actually bought there's a book. It's called The Hound of Distributism, because I'm pretty interested in economics, and I wanted to read it because he had never made a video about it, and still hasn't to this day. If you ever able to talk to him, please remind him to read it. I mean, I wrote my own definitional essay on it because I had no clue what it was. But to get to my point, one of the main ideas of distributism is subsidiarity. So essentially handling things governmentally at the lowest possible level. And the lowest possible level for that is not the individual, because the individual, you can't divide the individual, is the family. And I think that's where, like, especially I've really thought about that, because essentially every family will suffer from meningitis, either bacterial or viral. And the way that appears is in families where it says the bacterial version, where it's just sort of stuff either outside of the family or internally that isn't natural, say divorce or just family stuff. Like stuff will happen. You're not going to live that perfect trad life. It's not going to be a perfect forever. Something will happen, or it'll be natural causes, or maybe a combination of both. And the response from that shouldn't be to give up. It should be to keep putting your feet like one step at a time, keep going forward. I mean, imagine it's the Battle of the Somme, and you just got knocked to the ground by a massive artillery round going off a couple feet, like 50 feet away from you. You have two options in this moment. You can either pick yourself up, or you can either lay there in the mud and just accept defeat, or you can pick yourself up, grab your gun, and keep charging bayonet forward off into the no man's land. Like that's the situation we live in. Like especially me, I'm a pretty young guy. I'm like the only one who can carry on my family's name. Like not only me, like my immediate family, but the rest of my name. Like my dad literally changed my name back to the original and de-Ellicized it. So my goal is just to keep moving forward. I don't know what the future will be. Who knows? Maybe I'll end up a monk or something. But you got to keep moving forward, hoping for that day, even though you know that the family you found is going to be broken. Like there's going to be stuff wrong. You're going to have it's either daughter or gay son.
Well, that's well said, man. And again, thanks for your time and thanks for coming on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. Thank you, man. Good night. All right. Dump Waffle. Can you hear me? He was having some audio issues, so I'll give him some time to figure that out. For those who don't know, Dump Waffle previously, or Dump and Waffle, excuse me, previously Scratchy McDump Waffle is basically my personal bully. He follows me around and demands my internet lunch money. And in addition to just kind of hounding me across multiple platforms, he does super chat. So you know what? Fair enough. I actually have to be nice to him every once in a while, but nonetheless. All right. Well, says I'm backstage. Well, you're on now. Dump Waffle. Okay, I'll swap. Can this Dump Waffle hear me?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, definitely. I think you have two tabs open, so you have two versions of you backstage. But never mind.
No, that's my doppelganger. I have to fight him and kill him.
Ah, well, fair enough then. I guess that makes sense. I can't blame you
Bastard.
for that. So how are you doing?
Really ruined. Oh, had a wonderful Christmas with the wife and the daughter. They're over here in the kitchen just hanging out. Daughter has 4 teeth, and she's figured out how to eat corn on the cob, and she's trying to share it with me right now.
That's impressive. I
She has 6
admire the determination, I guess. That's impressive.
Oh, she's like chowing down on it, dude. I broiled it in the oven because my gas grill is not working right now, and yeah, she's going to town on it. I'll tell you this. I'll tell you this: when you and your fiance finally have kids, do you ever watch that show Scrubs from the mid 2000s? Out of curiosity.
I didn't. I think it was in diapers when it came out.
Okay, well, it makes me feel old. Well, there was a quote in the show, and it's actually pretty true. And it's that kids are kind of like dogs that slowly learn how to talk, because they just crawl around, get into everything, and they want to chew on everything they can find until they learn how to talk. Then they're actually people. And
Yeah,
also
fair
dog toys are like indistinguishable from baby toys because they're all made of rubber, they're malleable, and they squeak.
You actually make a compelling point there. The real question is, why do so many millennials make the trade the other way and decide, well, it seems like this pit bull is a suitable substitute for a child?
That's a great question, because that pit bull can never get a job and potentially take care of you when you're 70.
See, here's the point, though. In a cage match, the pit bull wins 10 times out of 10. So I understand it from that angle. You know, pit bull v toddler, if you will.
Mm-hmm. Well, here's what it is, right? It's like, have you ever designed a character in an RPG, you know, like in Dungeons and Dragons or anything?
Yeah.
You see what happens with humans is we put most of our points into, you know, intellect, charisma, and intelligence, and like nothing into constitution and strength, right? Whereas the dog's got high strength and constitution.
Yeah, that's fair enough, actually.
And to pay the price for that, it's like, oh, you know, like think about it like this, because you know when you have a kid, this kind of realization hits you. Kids are like completely useless for the first couple of years of their life. I mean, don't get me wrong, I love my daughter, she's adorable, she's absolutely cute, and I don't want her gone, but you know, she's completely useless. Like the entire point, the entire point of having a kid is the entire point of having a kid is to have someone that carries on your legacy, you know, that lives longer than you do, you know what I mean? That can carry on into the next stage of civilization. Well, that's a lot of investment, a lot of time, and a lot of effort. And I would say that millennials just aren't willing to do it. The average millennial is just like, no, that sounds like, you've even heard people say it. I guarantee you've heard people say it where you go, hey man, I need you to do this. And they go, that sounds like a lot of work. You know what I mean? And they're applying that to their biological duty of having kids. It's like, you know, having a kid, you know, that sounds like a lot of work. It's like, are you freaking kidding me right now? It's like, dude, imagine telling like people in ancient Babylon or in ancient Rome, like, hey, like imagine if they decided, you know, having kids is a lot of work, and they decided not to, then, you know, we wouldn't have gotten to outer space. You know what I mean? So it's like, if we don't have kids, like we can't conquer the galaxy. Like, it's
No,
impossible.
I definitely know what you mean. And look, there's a part of it that it's like, well, okay, like I get it's a lot of work, but like, what else are you here for, man? Just like, it is literally your biological purpose. And
Yeah,
if
right.
you've ever been to a large city, you'll know that people with next to no skills and very low intelligence seem to manage it. I mean, not well, but to like like a reasonable degree. You know, it's really like, it's not, on one hand, it's very complicated. And on the other hand, it's not very complicated at all.
It really is not as hard as people think it is, right? Like the hard part is you get shitty sleep, and they cry for the first 2 years, they can't talk, they cry, which means you have to guess as to what's upsetting them. That's the hard part. And then after that, when they, you know, develop self-awareness, well, then they get annoying because they haven't figured out that other people exist, right? They haven't figured out that their desires, oh, you going to give me some corn? No, you have the corn. Dad already had some corn. Anyway, it's like they haven't figured out, you know, what's up?
I said theory meeting praxis.
Exactly. So, I don't know. Like, I like my daughter. I want to have more kids. I told my wife if we were wealthy, you know, like Rothschild's wealthy, I'd try to have like 8 or 10 kids. Like, I'd have a ton of them. Because you're right.
Well, it's what you're there for.
It is pretty much all we're here for. Yeah,
And
it's like go ahead. I'll let you finish, and then I'll carry on with that main point.
no worries, man. And there's also something about it that it's just like you see this because there's kind of a revealed premise in that idea, that, well, I'll never make any decision in my life that impacts the level of immediate personal comfort I can have. Like, oh, I don't want to have a kid because, like you said, like you get shitty sleep for a while, or because you have to spend money on the kid, or all of these things where it's like, well, so your point in life is to just kind of like maximize lizard brain pleasure, like,
Yes.
and if you just go out and say it, like, fair enough, but most people are almost like they believe it, but they're too much of a coward to actually admit it.
Yes, you're 100% right on that. Like, to put things in perspective, and this is going to be for everyone else out there that's thinking about this. Like, my wife worked before we had our daughter. And then after our daughter, my wife quit her job because, we specifically, I'm going to sound real bad in saying this. I wanted to do it anyway, but we found a study that kind of, reinforced what we believe. I had said, I think it's best for her to just, stay at home with one parent and have like one parent raise her for like the first probably 2 to 3 years of her life. And then after that, put her in daycare. Because, the social development is important, but you don't want to do it too early, right? And on top of that, there's the whole worry of, well, what kind of pervert am I sending my kids to go to school with? You know what I mean? Because you don't really know. Well,
no, I completely am aware. Sorry, I've just gotten a very large super chat, which Sam, I really appreciate it. That's very kind. But I'm going to read this out because this might be one of the funniest sentences I've ever read. Like a modern day Don Quixote, my horse is a Dodge Charger. My lance is a Glock. I swerve into the cul-de-sac, sending welfare queens flying. I stare down the pit, toddler still in its mouth, revving the engine. I accelerate forward, Riders of Rohan. Which, that's funny enough. I'm just going to save that and pin that to my Telegram because that's great, Sam. But sorry,
what
man.
you should
Thank you very much. That was generous, but also very funny.
What you should actually do is you should put that as like your Twitter bio.
Oh, I'm 100% going to do that. That's metal as hell. Sorry, you were saying something, man.
No, what I was saying, we found this. My wife actually found this study because, again, this is why I married her, because she's amazing. She found this study. It was like a transnational study, as in multiple countries were in it, where they studied child development based on when kids were put in daycare and compared it with income brackets. And they did it was a fairly thorough evaluation. And essentially what they came up with was, if you can afford it, it is better to have your children stay at home with one parent until they're about 2 years old. After 2 years old, then you can put them in daycare because it's fine, right? But it was 2 years old was the cutoff. And what they basically discovered is, what is it? I want to say it's cortisol. That's the stress hormone, right? Am I right about that? I think it's cortisol.
I mean, look, you're talking to someone whose understanding of science is essentially that of a Somalian, so I think that's probably magic. I literally no idea, but I believe you.
Point is that they correlated the stress hormone with negative neural development, basically. Like, that's what it was. And there was a strong correlation with higher cortisol levels at such young ages and criminality later in life. So that's something to think about. And by the way, they didn't just look at, parents putting their kids in private daycare. They looked at and analyzed state-funded childcare as well. Like, I think they have it in Quebec was one of the big test areas they did it with. Oh, you're trying to hand me that?
Well, it makes sense, right? I mean, obviously we have the problem, and this is, manifestly true, that like helicopter parenting, where essentially you have all of, a couple's attention, focused on one like absolute golden child that, is protected from all harm. That's obviously bad. But the like, and actually, what's his name? Jones, the Catholic guy who really hates the tribesmen. What's his name? E. Michael Jones. He, in Libido Dominandi, he has a whole section about kind of like early 1920s parenting methods. And there was this idea, which was, again, extremely scientific at the time, that you don't want to baby your children. So what they would do is they would, to almost like a psychotic level, deprive their children of attention. They've specifically made, like holes in the wall in children's bedrooms so that their parents could watch them and make sure they weren't, harming themselves without, physically showing themselves to their children and showing them attention. And unsurprisingly, despite the fact that it was extremely scientific, it created a bunch of psychopaths. Like it just created very malformed children.
I was going to say, that sounds like literally they pulled out a witchcraft book and said how to create a serial killer. Like,
yeah, really. It was like add 3 units of childhood neglect.
The secret ingredient is rage.
just add a bunch of mommy issues and a seething resentment for all other people, and bing bang boom, you got it.
If you really, really want to take it over the top, while your wife is 8-9 months pregnant, just scream at her belly. Just throw caution to the wind and just let it all, like pretend that her belly is the reason you have pain in life and just scream at it.
Well, see, really, I've been planning on pulling a George Floyd, and just pointing a loaded gun at it, or gun at her rather. But
that would be
anyway,
that would be quite
fine.
The thing.
Perfectly fine. We love George Floyd here. Big George Floyd fans.
Yeah. So this was when I was in the Navy, right? I was an instructor for like my last 3 years, so I deal with students and everything like that. And I was very vocal about, being married, enjoying being married, and can't wait to have kids. I was like, yeah, I'm probably gonna have 2 to 3 kids, right? Actually, at the time, if you'd asked me, I would have said minimum 3. And then I had my first daughter and saw the finances after having 1 kid, and I'm like, okay, probably gonna have 2, maybe 3. But
well, see, the hack I've learned from hanging out with a bunch of like crunchy cons and hippies is to just have some crusty old woman come out and your wife gives birth in a bathtub. I have not seen this happen, but I have been assured that it is much cheaper.
Well, it wasn't the hospital because I actually have pretty good health insurance. It's not that. It's more like we are also kind of hippies about what we feed her because we want to make sure that we're not feeding her. Yeah, we want to make sure that we're not feeding her, garbage with microplastics. My wife is on like a crusade against plastics. Like my Warhammer hobby actually gets under her skin because she's like, "Where's all this damn plastic coming from?" And then sees these little gray figures and she goes, "It's you. It's your fault."
We've had a conversation about this in the Telegram, where the easiest way to red pill a woman is just tell her about microplastics and xenoestrogens, and then you come back 3 months later and it's like, what the hell happened? It's a little bit alarming. It's like all that like moral panic, that normally is directed towards like, whatever dumb Instagram hashtag has been turned towards like eradicating goy slop from your presence.
It's amazing. I love it. But what I told my students when they were like, "Are you sure you want to have kids?" I don't know. Kids seem kind of difficult. Was I said, I was like, think about it like this, right? Like no organism on Earth has achieved immortality. But we all still have the survival instinct. So what's the closest thing we have to immortality? Making copies of yourself. And what are those copies? They're your kids. Like that, you're essentially making a 50% clone of yourself every time you have kids. And they go, "Yeah, isn't that kind of selfish though?" And I said, "Do you love yourself or do you hate yourself?" It's like, well, I mean, I don't know. I'm like some of my students would struggle with depression because that's like a normal thing nowadays. And it's like, I don't know about you, but I think I'm awesome. I don't think I'm the most awesome dude in the world, but I'm pretty happy with my life. And I'm like, yeah, there's not much I would change. There's not much I would change in my life. I'm pretty happy with the way things are. So of course I want to make copies of myself and bring them into the world. Of course I want to show my 6-year-old daughter, be like, "Hey, do you know who this is? This is the demon Primarch Angron, and he's gonna beat up your bed monsters." You know what I mean?
That's a good point. And there's also something to be said for the fact that it's like, what do you view as, and this is what the guy who was on before was saying, that like, look, like, well, what is your job? Like, all right, you accept that the situation now is kind of rough, if you're in our circles. And it's like, okay, well, can you personally fix it right now? If you can, what are you doing listening to me? Go do that. But if you can't, it's like we kind of have 2 options. You can either just, sit around and be depressed and then, jerk off and then neck yourself. Or, assuming you don't want to do that, well, it's like, okay, well, you got to build something and build towards something productive. And a big part of that is making sure that there are more children in the world with good ideas, that you put in their brains and, raised with your values and your genes and all that. Because let's be honest, like culture and genetics are to a certain degree linked. And obviously that doesn't win you the game, but like, much like if you're playing Crusader Kings, if you consider yourself, maybe like a 6 or 7 out of 10, you're looking for that 10 out of 10. And so you got to roll the dice a couple times to get a character with, the perfect D&D stats, I guess. Maybe that's a dumb way of looking at it, but maybe you get
No, it's more, I mean, that's not a bad way at all. It's also like this. It's like, okay, have I won? No. Well, when's the end of the game? The end of the game is a long damn time from now. Like, as in, it's impossible for you as a human to make it to the end. Well, if you give up now, then you've given up and you've already lost. Like, and it's like, are you a loser? You're just gonna give up, dude? Or you can have kids and raise them right, and then they can have kids, and then maybe one day you'll get to the end of the finish line and you'll be, I don't know, some xeno exterminating zealot, or they could be they could be one of the dukes from Dune or something. Who knows, right? Or
I'll put it this way: if you get like your like end of life stat screens, and I find out that someone with my retarded IRL last name became like the Khan of the Southeast, that would both be incredibly satisfying and incredibly amusing. That like whatever my genetics went on to make like some small percentage of like based Red Caesar, which I don't know, maybe it'll never happen, but it's something to at least motivate you through life.
It's
but
not
anyway,
just
man,
that. It's not just that. I'll end it on this. It's not just that. You created that guy, and then he fathered so many children that like 4% of the human population have their genetics.
Essentially, of course. Anyway, man, thank you so much for coming on. But we got more guys in line behind you, and I don't want to keep everyone up all night. But I enjoyed talking to you, man.
No problem. All right, you have a good one.
All right, talk to you later, Scratchy. All right, Melon, and then I'll bring on Praise of Folly and AP next. Sorry to bring up something so dumb, but did you see that 200-pound black chick in a Waffle House throw a chair at the 90-pound white girl, and then she catches the chair, Lamau? I actually did. It was kind of frightening. And if, like me, you've kind of like journeyed all over the the south of the country, you have eaten in dozens of Waffle Houses, and there's no more alarming person on earth, like no one who could do more damage than the one white woman who works overnight at a Waffle House. Like that's essentially, that person's a prison guard. And I really don't know what she was thinking, because that is that is a fearsome person. You have to be, or you don't make it. All right, Todd, how you doing?
Oh, man? Hey, I'm doing great. I just finished up my year in review, next year projects, and AMA stream.
Oh, I saw that on. Obviously, I was doing my own thing, but yeah, I'll catch back up on that. That sounds interesting. I've been criminally behind on YouTube content because of IRL stuff and recording, and I've got this massive backlog of your videos that I need to go back and catch up on. But anyway, guys, by the way, you should head over to Praise of Folly's channel because he does a lot of good stuff. So I'm curious, what were the kind of like themes of your year in review?
Right. So it was an hour show, so I'm not going to go into an hour here. But I'll just say briefly, really in the last 6 months is really when I've been doing the regular content. My backlog goes back to 2015, but I wasn't doing it regularly, right? For one point, I was doing like 6 videos a week, but I cut that down a little bit once I saw what would stick and what didn't. So really, my channel doubled. That was great. Well, it's actually more than doubled now, right? Since June. So that was great. A lot of great support from the audience, people tuning in, people supporting on locals and buying me a coffee. It's been great. And then next year I mentioned, ideally, right? My ideal would be this time next year, in addition to YouTube, I have a Gumroad podcast and a Substack. Those two would be paid subscriptions. The YouTube stuff would still be basically free. And I'm just wondering if I can actually do all 3, because that's going to be a lot. But I'm gonna shoot for it and see what happens.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I'm in kind of a similar boat where I think I might have you beat in one area, and that's year-over-year percentage increase, considering I started this year. So but nonetheless, I'm in very much a similar situation where it's like I'm wanting to lean more into this because I enjoy doing it. It's incredibly fulfilling, even if it's not incredibly lucrative. It's just fun to do. It's fun to talk to people. And it does kind of feel like there's kind of a spotlight on our circle. People are looking to, kind of like the radical right for answers, and obviously that doesn't necessarily mean that, you and I will be catapulted into stardom, but like, there are people interested in this space. So it's kind of fun. There's like a vitality to it. But I very much am in a similar situation where it's like, I'm on one hand trying to, keep up with demand and put out more, but it is something where you kind of look at it and you're like, oh, like, I don't know if I'll be able to keep up.
Exactly. Now, again, I haven't got to that threshold yet, so I don't know. It's this distinction between an actual and a theoretical maximum, right? There's like a theoretical maximum that you can imagine getting to, but can you actually get there? At least can you get there by yourself? And, I don't know yet, but I'm gonna just push it out there and see, and who knows? Maybe people will be like, oh, don't cancel it, Todd. Maybe we can somebody will come and be like a co-host or something. Maybe once you grow it out there and then you realize that's just too much for one guy to do, somebody will come up and say, well, hey, we can make it a 2 or 3 man job.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. It's been interesting. One of the things that I've wanted to do is I like YouTube. Like, this stuff is super fun and it's very useful, but I've been kind of trying to push more into audio, not because I don't like YouTube. It's just that YouTube is very much hostile territory. And there's always that kind of sword of Damocles, hanging over you when that's kind of like your only option, and so I need to, not, my own stuff, but I do need to, put more of my time onto Gumroad, because I know there's a lot of guys over there doing good work, and it seems to be a very secure way, to support our friends, which is always something that's positive.
Yeah. For me, one of the things that my brother and sort of was encouraging me to go to Gumroad is, you don't have to worry about censoring yourself, right? I mean, you got Bronze Age Pervert on Gumroad. You've got Richard Spencer on Gumroad. They say what, look, if they're there, we're definitely safe because those guys are, would say far more inflammatory things. So.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's odd. I've finally gotten to the point where I regularly receive, negative internet attention, mostly from like people I don't particularly care about. But to me, it's always so odd because I feel like, you and I are very much on the tamer side of our circles. Like I try to be, relatively genteel. And even if you get me IRL, I'm not exactly, I'm not exactly the most radical person, by a long shot. And so it's always odd to me.
Right. Well, but again, that's the age we live in though, right? Because anything to the right of, Lenin is fascism, right? So
right, everything to the right, essentially, like Pol Pot and Mao Zedong is
exactly,
very least suspicious.
Exactly. So there's that, but yeah. So that was fun. It was also /AMA. My channel wasn't big enough, I thought, to do a full AMA by itself, so I wanted to have this like bundled package for all my viewers to be like, hey, you can see what's coming. You can ask me whatever questions you want and I'll answer, because that's the whole point of the show. And it worked. It was good. It was pretty popular. Looking at the analytics, all the likes that I got were consistent with all the live views that I got. So it's pretty good when you have that level of overlap of live views with likes being very close. That means most people that tuned in liked it.
Well, good to hear it, man. I'm a firm believer in the fact that you never look at your analytics. I was kind of joking, and most people took it as a joke that I learned my disdain rather for my audience from AA. And of course, I'm like mostly joking because the guys in the Telegram and the chat are always pretty great. But it is just kind of funny because you say that and people are like, "What? You can't talk about your chat like that. You can't talk about the people that watch your videos." I'm like, "Yeah, oh, watch me. I'll do it again." But I don't know. It is kind of funny because there's something kind of capricious about YouTube, in the sense that like the thing that makes it so maddening is that while there is data on the back end, it's so difficult to tell. There's no correlation between what you do and what kind of comes out on the other end to a certain degree. It very much it's a black box, the algorithm, and it can drive you nuts if you're kind of constantly trying to figure out what it's actually doing, because it changes so often. Have you felt the same way about that?
Well, actually, no. Actually, for me, I would say that so far, right, most of the people that are, for all of your subscribers, the portion that actually engages with you is a much smaller fraction, right? So I don't know how small that would be, but it's generally much smaller. But in my case, I mean, I've only had maybe one or two, actually really just cantankerous people, and the mods that I have usually just mute them, and it's been generally pretty. That would be for the live chat, and then for like the chat, the comments after the videos are up, they generally are pretty good. Either they're good because they like the content that I have, but also they'll ask interesting questions to like drive my sort of like projects into other directions. They'll bring up stuff. So I think I attract a higher caliber of viewers, and then the people that want to like step out and send me a message, for whatever reason, and I'm glad that's the case, tend to be just of a higher caliber.
Well, I'm glad to hear that, man. And I will say everyone should go over, after this is done, of course, I want to keep as many viewers as I can, but after that, you should go head over to Praise of Folly's channel, because that sounds like an interesting time. But anyway, man, I've got a couple people, behind you. So is there anything you want to say as we, kind of wrap up this segment?
Well, yeah, I guess the one thing that I want to say is that when we look at the last big appearance that I had was on the cigar stream, right? Is that particular question of what do we do now, right? Because we kind of get stuck with like the sort of what I call the moral anarchy of the red pill, where you just enjoy the decline, and then the sort of like tradcon finger wagging, which doesn't really get anywhere. If we just sit around and do nothing, the time and tide will sweep us all away. What can we really do given our limiting constraints? And hopefully that appearance and then my follow-up video explaining my position more fully can move that conversation to something more constructive. Because in that regard, all concerned in the circle have a lot invested in that question.
Well, I think that's well said, man. So thank you for your time, and I'll be sure to check out your recent work, because I've been sadly behind. But I'll talk to you later, Todd.
Yeah, talk to you later. Bye-bye.
All right. American Populist, how are you doing, man?
Good. How are you doing, man?
I'm doing well. I'm sorry I haven't talked to you in so long. I've been crazy busy, and I've really missed talking to you.
No, I've had quite a Christmas week, shall we say. My apartment actually flooded on Christmas Eve. A pipe burst in half because it's been getting to like 4 degrees at night here in Western North Carolina, so it's been getting pretty cold, and I guess this pipe just couldn't take it anymore, so it burst in half and flooded our entire like first floor, our townhouse. So we had to move all of our stuff to a different apartment on Christmas Eve. So that was quite an adventure I had.
I've actually had the same thing happen. I lost a ton of my stuff. Like a big part of my book collection was ruined because when I was in school, we had an upstairs, like there's a pipe behind the toilet, and it burst while we were gone over Thanksgiving break, and it completely flooded the entire apartment. And it sucks, especially if there's no one there. It's just like you lose so much, both due to water and then due to, to mold as well. It sucks. So I know exactly what you mean with that.
No, we were lucky because we were there when it happened.
Oh, good.
It could have been a lot worse, but yeah, it basically came in through like the ceiling. It was like a sprinkler pipe connected to a water main. So it was like flooding from 3 places, which is very weird to me. It was like flooding outside the door, and from the sprinkler head, and just like an air vent. It's just very weird how this pipe works. But speaking of that, man, have you heard about the recent news with our favorite figure, Mr. Uncle Ted?
Oh yeah, I heard that he's allegedly passed, in which case, like God rest his soul and all that. But has it been confirmed by anyone real, or is it just a rumor on Telegram?
For now, it's a rumor, but if true, rest in peace.
Yeah, obviously, right? Yeah, jeez.
A true visionary of his time.
Isaac in chat, Aura says, not confirmed yet. He seems to think he's still alive, and obviously, I hope he is. I know he's an old man, but nonetheless, I'd hate to see it happen. Yeah, it's interesting. I kind of think that one of my biggest moments of kind of like comprehension was reading that essay, that he wrote, "The System's Greatest Trick," because it nearly it neatly describes kind of that mechanism by which kind of like the system folds the kind of like boomer truth back into empowering the system, which is something that a lot of us kind of instinctually felt. But Ted Kaczynski's "The System's Greatest Trick," which you should all check out, guys. It's on Skeptical Waves. He's done it. Is very good at neatly kind of describing that mechanism.
No, we just love the memes, don't we? From his, again, not justifying his actions, but he had some of the right thinking about what the problems that we were going to face when we were going to become a technological society that I think we're starting to see now, especially with these like have you seen like how they want to project like ads into like space now, where you'll just see Coca-Cola ads from space at night or something like that? And it's, the image with just Ted just sitting there like, this is what I warned you about. So I think we took, we could have learned a lot earlier from him, but he's a legend. Not justifying his actions, but still think he's just quite an interesting person.
No, definitely. And it's interesting because I kind of oscillate continually between being a techno optimist and a techno pessimist. And it's something that I'm not sure if I've definitely like 100% figured out my position on. But, Kaczynski has some incredibly insightful, points he brings up. And the way that he skewers kind of like the modern leftoid personality, in industrial society and its future, his manifesto is incredibly astute. The way he describes these people as being kind of like over socialized, that the things that they value have been, completely and totally warped. Their system of affirmation is completely warped. And so it just kind of bars them from living, kind of like a normal human life.
No, it really does. Very deracinating, as we see in our modern age of depression and loneliness. But glad that there was always somebody there who saw it from his log cabin in the middle of Montana.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I always forget this, right? Because you always kind of forget this when you're on the kind of like the radical right, is you get really far down a rabbit hole and you forget, kind of how normal people interact. Because, and by the way, sorry, I think there was a little bit of audio issue on my end, but I've got it figured out. Nonetheless, it's you kind of forget who is considered, radical, because you're, in these circles, right? You can talk about Uncle Ted pretty freely. And then, you're hanging out with normal people and they're like, yeah, anyway, so Kaczynski said, and they're like, wait a minute, isn't he the guy that, and you're like, oh yeah, right. Yes, he is in fact the domestic terrorist. Anyway, I promise I'm not crazy. And I had a somewhat amusing, moment like that. But anyway, man.
No, yeah, I definitely think that happens a lot. When you bring up words that only we talk about, like Lindy or Inshallah, and then the normies like just freak out, they don't understand, so they think you're some kind of weirdo or domestic terrorist if they're on the NPC side of things. So I definitely do think we forget just how like normie most people are, and where we are on the spectrum of things. Very far skewed.
100%. And I kind of had this moment too, that I think that people also forget that the temperature of conversation, that's normal in these circles is it's a lot more intense than normal people, because I legitimately was not trying to have an argument, but I had kind of a one-sided argument with this, this guy I met at a Christmas party, just kind of talking about, sci-fi, the three-body problem, dictator, stuff like that. And I didn't realize it until after it was over that I like seriously offended this guy. And I mean, like, you guys know me, I'm not a particularly confrontational person, but the relative level of just like banter and like kind of like wrestling of ideas was, so abnormal to this guy that he just like flipped out. And so obviously like that's not everyone, but I think that it's easy to forget, that normal people don't necessarily, kind of hash out ideas in the same way that, people on the internet do.
No, they consume their talking points from social media still, to a large degree, which is quite sad, considering where that narrative is pushing people.
I got a super chat from Yebsi for $2 Canadian, which let me convert that.
Convert your 30 Canadian dollars.
If it's enough money for me to care. Wow. Brave is good at some things and is very bad at doing that. All right. That comes out to $2.75. Okay. So that is fair enough. Here's the problem, Yevsey. You've created a perverse system of incentives where you keep paying me money and telling me to do something. And so you realize you've created a system where if I don't do it, you will continue sending me money. But I do realize I should set up an entropy. And that's part of what will be coming in the new year as I kind of roll out some new branding stuff and make this a little more professional. So I promise I do take that to heart, and I'm working on it. But anyway, AP, we've got a few people behind you. So is there anything you want to say as we kind of wrap this little segment up?
No, yes, I just hope you all enjoyed your Christmas. And if you haven't, please check out my channel because I do have a lot of good stuff coming up. I have some professional edited videos coming up, and I have some really cool guests coming on my live streams very soon that you all will enjoy. So check out my channel if you haven't.
That sounds really exciting. You've been dropping some good stuff recently, and I saw that you were over on Yiz's channel not too long ago, so people should check that out.
Yes, I have a really good interview with her that people seem to enjoy quite a lot.
Well, all right, man. People should go check you out. I like your work, and I'll be sure to be in touch, more than I've been over the last couple weeks. But I'll talk to you later, man.
All right, talk to you later, man.
All right. Oros, how are you doing, man?
Damn. No, see, I can't hear you. Damn it,
can't hear
dude.
me?
All right. Put me in the background and bring someone else on because I can't hear you, and I'm gonna go get some headphones or something.
Yeah, no worries. All right. If anyone else wants to join, this conversation, and you don't need to be a person to the YouTube channel, you can just be a guy. No women, of course, but you can hop on. Just use the link in the link pinned or kicked or sorry, I can't read and speak at the same time. Just use the the link pinned in chat if you want to hop in, because I'll stay on as long as you guys want me on, because everyone's gone, and so I got nothing to do but talk. All right, I'm gonna add Oros on and see if he's figured out his audio issues. Oros, can you hear me now? All right, well, fair enough. I'm guessing he can't, so I'll just kind of waffle on until he gets out. I actually like Oros's new logo. I again have redone.
Dude,
hey,
I don't know.
Can you hear me now?
Hold up. I can't hear you. One sec. I'm just gonna restart this. I don't know. It's weird because I can hear other shit, but I can't hear the StreamYard. So I don't want to bomb your stream, homie.
All right. Well, I'll give him more time to figure that out. I know this is super professional, guys. Actually, while he's doing that, what I will do is I will address previous super chats from stuff I haven't read before. Douglas Dimmadome, owner of let me read that. Douglas Dimmadome, owner of the Dimsmail Dimmadome, which you may not know, that is also Scrotchy McDumpwaffle, the same person. He said, "I'm an anonymous idiot on the internet. Are you going to complain about me?" And yes, of course. All I do is complain about you in particular. Really, it's an abusive relationship where I get yelled at by Scrotchy really anywhere he can find me. And then falling outside the normal moral constraint says, for $20, and this is very, very generous. And he sent that on my stream with Pete on the 22nd. Wishing a very Merry Christmas to two of my favorite people in the sphere. I really appreciate all the great streams this past year and look forward to more quality chats in 2023. God bless both you and your family. I really appreciate that. I know, Pete would as well. Like I said, I really want to lean more into this. Okay, awesome. Isaac should be fixed now. I really want to lean more into this because this is really fun. It is work, but I enjoy it a ton. And I really want to, kind of like invest what, funds I've gotten back into this and make this better. So, expect an increase in quality. I want to do that both just because I want to be better at this and, for its own sake, and also that I want to, show some kind of reward for the support I have received. All right, Oros, you back?
All right, I'm good.
Good. I'm glad to hear you, man.
Yeah, I'm glad to talk to you. So I want to address the Ted Kaczynski thing, because people, everybody, you know, knows their lovable Uncle Ted, and you know, what I've noticed when I was looking up on Twitter to see if like anyone confirmed it, which it hasn't been confirmed. It seems like it was just some bullshit. And I, you know, I was sad. I was, you know, he's an important guy. And but here's the thing. When I was looking at like responses to people who were like, "Oh, Ted Kaczynski died, the piece of shit Unabomber," and you look in like the comments, and it's like people are like, you know, I don't agree with you what he was doing, but his ideas were correct, and they'd get like more likes than the actual like tweet itself. And there's this weird thing. I mean, it's especially after like mainstream videos on YouTube that talk about Uncle Ted. It's pretty clear there's like this there's this consciousness among a lot of people, maybe especially young people who I think you and me being the same age and having, you've talked about this before, and I've actually talked about this too, like independently, because I think we both witnessed this, is we remember a time before phones and then a time after phones, after the iPhone, and how that impacted people in such an obviously poor way that there is this desire for simple times. But I do want to say, by the way, because you know, Ted, he probably will die soon. He's got, you know, cancer. He's in prison. He's a sad man. He's probably going to die soon. But please, you know, pray for him, pray for his conversion, etc. What I will say is the guy, not that he's an idiot, not that he's like plagiarizing, but people, you know, they should read Ted, whatever. What you need to do is read Jacques Ellul and Ivan Illich, because it's pretty clear Ted probably read Jacques Ellul at some point, the Technological Society from 1954, which is like, if you want a deep dive into like being able to debate on why technology, and not really technology, but as Jacques Ellul puts, technique is bad, read the book. Highly recommend it, because then you'll have a bit more of a mature, less Luddite mindset on it, because too many people are like, oh, technology bad. But then it's like, okay, well, then the only way you can really address that is to become a caveman, which, you know, you can't even do that these days because there's property. Everything's owned, or either owned by people or by the federal government. But
no, definitely. Yeah. And a lot of people kind of cuck out on Kaczynski. You know, they'll basically like, he was great, but you know, I disapprove of his methods. Everyone knows you disapprove, and I'm not just making fun of AP for that. Like plenty of people do that. But to me, my reservation with you know, with Ted is very much what you said, is that essentially there is just like his vision of, you know, returning to the Bronze Age, you know, or returning to the, you know, the whatever, you know, the Stone Age is just fundamentally unrealistic. And it's why I've been hammering on so much about the fact that the way things work is not just out. Things don't drop out of the sky. Things don't just occur. There's a synthesis. And unless a catastrophic event happens, you know, people's material conditions change on a level completely never before seen. People will not go back to the Bronze Age.
Dude. Yes. No, I think one of the main things, everybody, like, that'll blow your mind, and anybody, and I will say, well, two things here. The thing to always remember about like what you hate about technology, just keep this in mind. It's not technology. It's the milieu of technique. It's the idea that everything should be as efficient as possible, which is why we're at a point, in my opinion, where shit is getting, you know, so out of hand that, you know, they want to have that everything is kind of centralizing into like one massive electronic brain, one computer. Where the best example always will go to is cars, and you know, there's basically there's the real world of simple technology that you don't need as many processes to make that simple technology happen. But then now you have Teslas, you have your Ford Lightning, Chevy Silverado, electric trucks, etc. And we're clearly going in a direction that's very centralizing. It's not that you hate the technology, it's the fact that in the entirety of our society, because it's secular, like that's the main issue, has led to people thinking that the only thing that's good is more efficient technology. And no civilization has ever thought like this until the Second Industrial Revolution, especially in America, before this, there's never a civilization that was like, we need to find the sharpest sword that cuts in the best way. It's just no, that like people thought that was like this is like someone who drinks a bit too much of the wine. Like they're going a bit too far into this thing. Like maybe we should not listen to that guy. That's kind of what technology has become. I forgot my second point. Yeah,
Sorry,
that's
man.
probably good enough.
I'm back. Nothing
Yes.
occurred. It's all just, completely natural, guys. Nothing, nothing ever happened behind the scenes. It's just seamless. But to get back to what you said about kind of like everything, kind of conglomerating and, centralizing, is that I think that your analogy of cars is a good one, right? Because essentially every car now is a CRV at a larger or smaller scale, right?
Yeah.
And there's this famous meme that's basically, it's a bunch of, modern cars with the badges removed. And the idea is like, oh, can you pick out which car is which? I can, because I have autism, but a normal person cannot, because they're essentially all the same vehicle. Everyone makes a, mid-sized crossover with a 4-cylinder turbo engine, a CVT transmission, and essentially the same options. It's just effectively what wrapping do you want that product to come in?
Mm-hmm.
And on one level, right, it's, Melon, this is a good point. Yeah,
exactly.
Why does my washing machine need a Wi-Fi connection? On one level, you can say like, oh, it's people reacting. It's what the people want. And I think that, if you've been in these circles long enough, you know that like popular consent, things like that, it's a myth. But nonetheless, right?
Yeah.
In the way that people describe it, that there is this like, invisible hand of the market, optimizing everything, like, oh, this is the perfect car.
Yeah,
but
don't bring out the invisible hand. No.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just kind of like heading that off at the pass.
No, yeah.
But there is this very much kind of like standardization of everything, and look, I have not finished a little. I need to, I've been reading a lot. Actually, you'll see
Nice.
Luth Emplar is up next, and he's had me like a slave driver reading the 3 Body series, and I have finished it. But that is, if you know that series, it's pretty long. So I've been busy on that.
Okay.
But nonetheless, right, everything is kind of like coalescing into this kind of like gray soup. And I think that for the people who are, shall we say, not blindly attached to technology, there are those who essentially view the, the panopticon, like the eternal surveillance biomedical security state as inevitable. Like, oh, they're going to, usher in the 1,000-year Reich of, Sujin Wojcicki and, whoever these like god-awful soulless technocrats are. But to me, like, it seems like more than anything else, like this is kind of a weird version of like the Tower of Babel, where it's like, I don't know if these people are competent enough to make it work. I think they're going to try, and it's likely that they can do a lot of damage in the process. But to me, I just don't think these people are capable enough managers to make it work at the level they think they can.
Yeah, I kind of have so what I've noticed is there's this oh man, I feel like this is my own original thought, but it seems too smart. So maybe I heard something else, but maybe it's influenced it. Okay, so I don't know what your eschatology is, but what I've noticed is with the people that I would love to convert into not being techno obsessed Nicklandian people and dreaming about the AI being a great thing in the most efficient society. What I've noticed about them is they're almost like a modernist secular version of the post-millenarian. And then you have the post-millenarian, what is it, believing that there's going to be the 1,000 years of, what is it, that they're I forgot how they order it, but
It's
essentially do you know it?
I just bought a book
Okay.
Called The Incredible Schofield and His Book, which is about the Schofield Bible and kind of millenarian theology. It's quite interesting. So I'm not from that perspective.
Okay.
But you're right. It is this kind of like alphabet soup of like different parts of theology. Where on one hand it's like almost like a pure like mirror image inversion, where instead of the 1,000 years of like the great Zionist deliverer Jerry Falwell camped out at Megiddo.
Yes.
It's like a dark version of that. But it's very much absorbed the same eschatology.
Yes. I think I think that the best thing people can do is probably start Manitize the pellets.
I'm sorry, that's the stupidest.
That's
thought.
the best thing I've seen all day. That's amazing.
This has been the funniest
Dude.
chat's ever been. Like you guys are on
Gosh,
fire
dude.
tonight. I can't compete with this.
They're on fire, dude. This is
I
gonna be,
I should just leave the chat running all night. You get more
yeah,
entertainment
just
than any
make
of
that the
us.
video, dude. No, so I think that like what I would like to see people kind of shift into is a mindset of like, okay, technological advancement is obviously not been the best thing, and you should probably have some skepticism about its progress, or else you're going to get like caught up in the you're going to get lost in the sauce basically. And I don't know, I've got a buddy who's a big technophile, and I have great conversations with him. But it's weird because we're both Christians, but we come from completely different. It's weird. Like you really know someone's eschatology based on the way they see technology. Because for me, I'm not like I'm either or. It's like I'm not anti it. It's just I see where it's going. I don't want. I don't like AI. It's I'm someone who's I appreciate the grug brain peasant mindset of it looks bad, therefore it is bad. And that's kind of how I actually ran my life. But
well, to me, and I feel like it is a combination of eschatology and your conception of human nature. Because if you believe that human nature is kind of a constant, that whether, through kind of like our inherent spirituality or evolution or whatever force, that there is like human nature is a constant fact that you can kind of account for. That leads you to a, not a completely like Butlerian jihad, like Luddite view of technology, but it leads you to kind of a limited view of technology, right? Where it's like technology is something that humans can use, but it cannot fundamentally transform, human nature. Or if you have this idea that like humans are to a certain degree perfectible, that there can be a heavenly kingdom on earth, by whatever means, either like directly eschatological or just kind of political.
Like the heavenly kingdom is in heaven. I don't know how it's more straightforward for people.
Well, and this is, I will say, this is the point that Moldbug brings up, that essentially this idea that there will be a heavenly kingdom on earth was originally a theological one, but it kind of morphed into the progressive political project. And he's not wrong. He takes it in kind of a weird direction because it's Moldbug, and of course he does. But nonetheless, right, that's an important bit of analysis. And I think that even though that, many of the people who are millenarian are extremely, extremely conservative, they share a similar intellectual root there.
Well, the reason that I talked about this recently on some stream, what I've realized is the reason. Oh yeah, it was the stream about MAID, the whole Canadian medically assisted in dying. What I've noticed is the reason that they believe in this transhumanist, techno-futurist future is because they, within their soul, they know that eternity is real. They know that they have a soul. They know that there is a utopia somewhere. But because they're physicalists and the only thing that they believe is what's right in front of them, they just spiritually dead. They try to bring that sense of the eternity and utopia must exist on Earth. So the way they end up doing that is, we're going to have a perfect future post-scarcity and everybody's going to live for basically ever, or we'll upload our brains to the fucking whatever AI computer shit. And so it's like they in a way they're like the post mills, but the sort of the negative version of that. Like, I'll disagree with post millenarian Protestants all day, but like at the end of the day they're Christians. So it's like, but with this, it's almost like the demonic equivalent. And there's so many people. That's why I don't really like Elon Musk too much, because I see like the people who follow him kind of fall into that death trap of like, we're gonna have the perfect world and medicine and science will advance and we'll be able to live for 1,000 years or whatever, go live on Mars and shit. And they don't even see like there's like, just go read Ecclesiastes, like the very nature of living. Everything is in decay. Everything is rusting. We are dying slowly but surely, aging. And if it's like the most obvious thing is that everything physical falls apart. There is no eternity in the physical world. There's something greater afterward. That's why we have eternity within us,
Yeah, entropy is kind of like a fundamental,
reality.
So this is a really dumb idea, but I was thinking like I have this
I'm dumb
idea,
too.
I'll move to Canada, and I'll have a business, and it'll be a maid cafe, where a girl in a black dress, sings J-pop, and then while you're feeling distraction, she just whips out a shotgun and just paints you all over the wall.
Dude, this is
a great idea.
This is better than the suicide booths in Futurama. That's
exactly right. Like at
Yeah.
least it's dinner and a show, I guess.
Yeah.
But anyway, to seriously engage with your point, it is very much kind of this, the limited versus the limitless vision of reality, constrained
Yes.
versus unconstrained.
Yes.
And I think that really, if we consider, who are our friends and who are our enemies, right? It's like, who are the people who have kind of allied themselves with entropy? Like people who, and this is one of, again, the primary, insights of the NRX sphere is the idea that the left is an entropic force. It is something that breaks down bonds, it breaks down ties. Yeah. And it's so frustrating to me because I spent, this kind of extended weekend with my, relatively politically divided family between, like pure, West Coast shitlibs and, my kind of like boomer neocon grandparents who and all of these people I have a great deal of, love and respect for. But in many cases, they have such a limited toolbox to understand things, right? So like my grandpa, who I'm, very close with, views everything through the lens of communism versus socialism, communism versus capitalism. Like he can't get outside of that, whereas like those things have both been right or left, kind of dependent on context. You know what I mean? In the sense that, like, to be honest, like, okay, yes, is Reaganism pro-nomian and pro-social compared to like, blue-haired trannies, like gyrating in front of a kindergarten class? Yes. But also that same thing broke apart social bonds. It, destroyed a society. And so to view your entire life through essentially like a toilet paper tube that only allows you to see the last 30 years, and only allows you to use that as your base of reference. It just like, you are essentially by default, and this is why I spend so much time kind of like haranguing the right, is because they have good instincts, to ally themselves with, to fight against, degeneration and to fight against entropy. But they've been given faulty premises and just allied themselves with a slightly older version of, or they're trying to push the boat up, 30 feet up the, upstream, and then hop right back in the river. Sorry. And I've mixed my metaphors horribly there, but I hope you get my point.
It was beautiful. No, what I've noticed, man, is I'm pro gnome, baby. I gotta say, man, I even just today at work, I work with like blue collar, like smart dudes, but they're like conservatives. But dude, I never, not once, will ever bring up politics, but they will. And so every time they do it, like trannies came up for some reason. Like we were making a joke about trannies, and one of them was like, well, I don't really care what someone does. Just keep. And I literally interrupted him, and I'm like, yeah, I do. I don't like them. Like what I've been doing at this point, man, is anytime you're approaching somebody who pretty clearly agrees with everything you would say about this, it's just throw it at them. Just be like, dude, it's okay, dude. These people are freaks. They're screwing up society. You don't have to play middle ground because we would do this forever. But there is something that I thought about when it comes to like the right wing, like even in our own sphere, is there's like this holdover of like libertarian like thought. There's not a lot of prescription going on. There's a lot of really good description, and obviously like Aaron McIntyre is a good example. He's so good at describing the issues, but when it comes down to like talking about he talked about, there was something he shared about how the majority of people want to have stimulus checks given to them, and he's like, and I guess the implication is that the Democratic Party will buy into that and make sure that they can get votes. But what it's like is like, dude, you're like, I love you, Aaron, but dude, you're putting yourself in the same fucking corner that you've all, like, conservatives have always done. Like, there's a certain point where you've got to say, like, yeah, we need to give money to people from the state. We can't like live in this fantasy world of like, we can have like a free market and also things be based. They won't. You get one or the other. I honestly, in my opinion, like I'm at this point, man. I've been liking Sandbatch a lot. I really like Sandbatch's point of view on stuff because he's the only guy I've ever seen in our spheres who's actually pro fiat, and I'm the same way. Like there needs to be talk about like dude, you need to have the state actually act on the part of people and not just kind of not play to the same fantasy of we want fairness. Like we honestly, dude, I really don't want fairness. It's like, that's why I did a whole stream about why we need to put we need to have the sunsetting penalty for drug dealers. Or at least life in prison for drug dealers. But yeah, I don't know. I kind of went off on a tangent there, but I've just been thinking about this so much. I'm like, dude,
no,
man,
so
I can see kind of the libertarianism still kind of shining throughout a lot of people, and I'm like, just stop it.
Well, right, and it's frustrating because in many cases it's people's best instincts. That they're like, look, like I don't want to, I don't want to be overbearing. I think that if people just used, common sense, quote unquote. And I am not someone who believes kind of like the maximal like Wignat idea that, someone can never integrate to another culture. I don't believe that to the nth degree, but I do believe that common sense per se doesn't really exist. There's human nature, right? There are just biological facts about people, but I'm telling you for a fact, the Somalian version, the French version, the Anglo version, and the Russian version of common sense are not the same thing.
Right.
And I mean, actually, and this again will have me, I'll bring this up with Luthemplar in a little bit, but like if you read literature from another country, you see that their perspective on things are different. They just have a different perspective, and that's informed by, the organization of society all the way down to like the guns, German steel level of like, well, how secure was their country from foreign invasion, all these kind of things. And the idea that people look at this and they're like, oh, well, if people just acted, according to the common sense that I think is common sense, which, for many of these people is, a more stable version of society, right? It's the world Pat Buchanan grew up in. It's this kind of like, strong, muscular America. If people just did that, we wouldn't have to have the state, or at least the state wouldn't have to be as strong as it is or as strong as it could be. And to be honest, they're kind of right. But the problem is that's one, not the world we live in. And two, libertarians make this mistake, and that they look at an ideal end goal, which is something that we broadly share across these spheres, which is basically a world of spontaneous order. Things just work, and we don't have to have, jackbooted thugs, peering into everyone's house all the time to make sure they work. People run their own affairs. We all want that. But the problem is you don't get that by just not having anyone enforce anything. You get that by being in power, and that's something that people on the right are not comfortable with. And what I think that Aron does so well is he is a wedge, and he presses right into the normicon. And the fact that you have people like Aron and people like Pedro Gonzalez who are so far to the right, so much more radicals than you could have read in, anywhere in print, even just 5-10 years ago is insane. And so to me, with people like that, like I get like, and I know Stained Haynes makes this point about like, oh, notice and move on. But nonetheless, man, like, okay, I'm going to go ahead and tell you that they definitely have things that they don't want to say. I don't know these guys, but I'm just telling you, like, but you don't get to be on the blaze if you do all that, So there's some kind of like tactical element to it that I respect, especially if your skill set is teaching normicons not to be morons, not to be Charlie Brown, missing the football over and over and over again. And to me, that's something I won't counter signal. But anyway, man, Isaac, I've gotta let you go because there's some more people in behind you. But I really enjoy talking, man. I always appreciate this. I'm gonna have you on for your own stream because I could talk to you all day.
100%, man. I love you, bro. And just real quick, Curse Jared Diamond for ruining an entire generation of people's perception of cultural relativism. They showed his freaking documentary when I was in history class in like 7th grade. Oh my goodness, dude. Screw Jared Diamond. He's fucked everybody up. But yeah, follow me, Oros Post on YouTube or whatever. Thanks, Jay. Take it easy, man. I'll finish the stream. See you,
Talk to you later, man. All right, Luth Emplar, Cringe Walker, how are you doing, man?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you really well.
Okay, good, because I switched. I finally got my old VR headset working, which has a much better audio quality. Unfortunately, my port image is not registering. Oh well. I was enjoying the conversation because I've been reading through some more Dark Age literature for fun. I was Dark Age posting today on Twitter quite a bit. And one of the most interesting things you find about the Dark Age quote unquote conquerors of the Western Roman Empire is that they were eager to pay and contribute to the local Roman bureaucracy to kind of hire them to run the kingdom because they didn't know how to run civilization at all. But there's this very quick patrilineage or patronage system that develops where the German kings and their warriors essentially were cleaning up clearing out all the nonsense in the Roman Empire and then finally fixing it basically. There's this really great quote that I posted actually. I just come in and start spamming about history, but am I still audible actually? I can't think I can hear myself. Test. Did my internet go out?
Sorry, yeah. Well, the reason you couldn't hear me is because I had myself muted. It had nothing to do with your internet. Right. It had everything to do with my incompetence.
Yeah, there's a bunch of internet nonsense happening right now. So this is saying basically, I don't know who wrote this. I think it may be Cassidorius, who was a Roman administrator during the barbarian era, or maybe the writer of this book, I forget. But he says, I have said that one of the most important characteristics of Theodoric's government of Italy was that it was conducted in accordance with the traditions of the empire and administered mainly by officials trained in the imperial schools. To a certain extent, the same thing is true for all of the Teutonic monarchs, which arose in the 5th century on the ruins of the empire. In dealing with the needs and settling the disputes of the large, highly organized communities unto whose midst they had poured themselves into, it was not possible, if it had been desirable, for the rulers to remain satisfied with the simple, sometimes barbarous principles of law and administration which had sufficed for the rude farmer folk who dwelt in the isolated villages beyond the Rhine and Danube. Nor was it necessarily disliked by the rulers themselves. They soon perceived that the Roman law, with its tendency to derive all power from the imperial head of the state and to the Roman officials and staff below, formed an elaborate and well-organized hierarchy, every member of which received orders from above and transmitted orders below. This was far more favorable to their own prerogative and gave them far higher positions over and against their followers and comrades in war than the institutions which had prevailed in the forests of Germany. Hence, as I have said, all the new barbarous royalties, even that of the Vandals in Africa, who are in some respects more anti-Roman than any other, all preserved much of the laws and machinery of the Roman Empire. But Theodoric's Italian kingdom preserved the most of all. It might in fact almost be looked upon as a mere continuation of the old imperial system, only with a strong, laborious, martial Goth at the head of affairs, able and willing to keep all the members of the official hierarchy sternly to their work, instead of the rulers for whom the last 3 generations had been accustomed to behold a man decked with purple and diadem, but too weak and too indolent and too nervous and afraid to irritate some powerful federati captain or Roman official to be able to do justice in the classes of his subjects. This is something that I've been really reading a lot. As we experience a decline, what's going to survive and what's not. Were you aware that the Roman Senate survived the collapse of the Roman Empire?
I actually was not. When did it officially end?
It continued to exist in some form or another into the 800s. When it was, the post-imperial Roman Senate is a fascinating mess. Theodoric comes in and basically tells the Senate, listen, I don't know how to run the shithole. Please help. And so the Senate essentially reasserts itself as a as an authority. Like Rome returns to a republican origin for about 200 to 300 years. Later on, the Lombards, I think, or maybe another king, get pissed off at the Senate because like once the Senate starts reasserting its authority, all the shit from the Caesar days starts coming back, and all the corruption that comes back. And one of the German kings just gets, I'm done. He holds them hostage and tells the emperor in Constantinople, fix this body of ruin, or I'm going to just start killing senators. and the Constantinople government was like, we have our own senate, we're good.
Yeah, you fix this problem.
Yeah, it's one of the. I keep saying that the period between the sack of Rome in 410 to the rise of Charlemagne in the year 800. This is like 400 years basically. That has some of the most interesting and innovative approaches to running a state of any period, because the traditions and customs of the Roman imperial era mostly don't work anymore. Like the administrative schools are still operating and still producing bureaucrats, but they're kind of forced to innovate once the old arrangements aren't working anymore. And likewise, you start getting these really innovative forms of hybrid governance that happens between, basically eventually becomes what we know as feudal. Feudalism is really, I think, like AA has said this, but feudalism is a synthesis of pagan government in Germany and church government left over of the Roman bureaucracy. It's like a hybrid system that was incredibly innovative for its time. But anyway, I'm done squealing about this.
No, not at all. And this actually goes back to a point that I've been just berating people with, is just the fact that like, and I think that this is a natural product of the way history is taught, where there are these kind of like clean, this replaced this, like eras, almost like layers in a cake. But like that's not how real life works. No system in succession is ever kind of like truly independent from what came before it. And to me, like, even though I didn't know that, I'd never heard that, it kind of makes sense. That it didn't just kind of like disappear into nothing and a new system kind of like arose in its place. That's interesting though.
Yeah, and so it kind of makes you wonder if America continues this catabolic model for collapse I've mentioned, where you get these periods of consolidation during the collapse, which might have the illusion of rising up again, like renewed strength. But really what's happening is that you have a general decline. The powers that be recognize the decline. They start abandoning parts that are unsustainable and consolidating parts that are easier to control. And so you have this brief period of what appears to be a strengthening, but it's only because you're not noticing the parts that they've abandoned. So like we can say right now that the United States is entering a period of consolidation after a period of collapse, whereby it's consolidating its power into several regional authorities rather than micromanaging a bunch of governments. So like, it's basically gone from managing the EU to managing Germany, and the EU will follow suit with whatever Germany does. It's gone from like managing all of Latin America to like, fortifying election in Brazil and a few other key areas, and letting the rest of South America orient around that. And this can appear as an emergence of a renewed empire, but what's really happening is that the United States is managing the stable parts more efficiently and letting the parts it can't control go. You can look at that like the famous Detroit and other areas where the water supply is just basically gone. And we just accept that. It's just, the water doesn't work there anymore. I mean, that area has collapsed. It's now in a period of dark age. And we're just like, yeah, okay. No worries.
Well, and I think that explains something really interesting. And you're onto something in the sense that like there's kind of this vacillation in our circles between like, oh, the regime is, 2 weeks away from collapse, and like the, eternal Fauci Reich. And I think that process of more and more limited consolidation explains that kind of neatly, where, to be fair, they are, from a certain perspective, losing control and then shifting those resources to a smaller and smaller area. Because I think about this all the time. And I was talking to my grandparents about this, because they're core baby boomers. They were born in 48 and 50, right? Mm-hmm. And when I asked them, I was like, look, like, did you ever think in your lifetime there would be just parts of the country that were effectively like lawless? There were just areas where crimes would go unpunished, that it was a realistic possibility that there would just not be power in certain states. And they're like, no, I like, they couldn't really wrap their heads around it. It just didn't seem like something that could happen in, their country. And again, like that doesn't mean that, the America's, 2 days away from becoming Somalia, but it does kind of seem that like that collapse and like re-entrenching, kind of like falling back to a smaller and smaller defensive position would kind of explain that.
Yeah. So here's a good example of this. So you know about like the French come from the Franks, right? The tribe of the Franks.
Yes. Yeah.
So how did that happen? Where did the Franks come from?
I don't know that actually.
The Franks actually entered the Roman Empire very early before the collapse. They were in the Roman Empire in the 200s. They started joining up with a lot of Rome always had mercenaries, and so they were very eager to hire German frontiersmen to manage the front. It was always easier to trust the German by blood oath because the Germans generally follow their blood oaths, whereas the Romans will abandon an oath for the right pay. so the Romans began relying on different tribals of the Franks to manage the border of the Rhine. And the Franks became rather good at killing their own German kind for the blood oath. But essentially, the Franks were brought in. It might have been Julian the Apostate. It might have been a different one. I forget which one who did. But like one of their emperors were like, let's just bring these guys into the empire. Do a little demographic replacement on the empty valleys of Gaul, and let's just let them like settle in and be a serf class, right? And so the Franks were basically allowed in. They didn't really invade. There were some invasions, but ultimately the Romans decided let's just bring them in as Romans and settle them and civilize them.
So what you're saying is essentially Franks are just Roman Mexicans.
Basically, yeah. So and by the time you get to like the year 400, they're speaking like a version of Latin that will eventually become French. They still speak Frank too. Frankish will continue to be used into the Charlemagne era, but they become like a dual linguistic group basically. And the fascinating thing is, so if they're in the Roman Empire and they're being treated basically as Roman citizens, at one point the Romans decide anybody that lives in their borders is a citizen. They kind of like do universal citizenship. When did France as a concept get born if they were French citizens, if they were Roman citizens? Like, how did that happen? Do you know that? This is a fun...
No, again, I'll have to...
Sorry for my questioning, my Socrates method, but...
No, not at all. It's
so what happened is that in 406, 30,000 Germans, they were Lombards, Goths, Vandals, all the classics. They were getting raided badly by Attila. Attila was just... This is one of these wars where there's virtually no information about what happened. We just know it's bad. Attila invaded Germany and more or less genocided the entire forests. This only exists in the form of mythical stories of great warriors, many of which would go on to be translated by Tolkien and inspire Lord of the Rings. So this is a weird area where there's these mythical battles between the Huns and the Germans. And the Germans lose badly. They basically get genocided. And so remnants of the German people, like some 30,000 men, women and children. I think it was 30,000 men plus their families, but I think it might have just been 30,000 people. So it may have been as few as like 15,000 soldiers. But they come to the border of the Rhine and they're like, what do we do? We're like, Attila's going to kill us all and Germany's going to fall. The Roman Empire will kill us if we cross the Rhine. We're in a rock against a hard place. And if you look at the maps of Europe in 406 AD, the Roman Empire was still united. I think they had started abandoning Britain, and that's about it. So like the catabolic collapse had started in Britain, but they were like kind of like there's the famous letter of one of the emperors to Britain, like fend for yourselves, we can't do this anymore. But the Franks, not Franks, the Germans decide, well, we have to cross the Rhine. And it just so happened that year in 406 was the first time in a long time that the Rhine froze over, like solid ice. And so this like chance occurrence where the very year that Attila invades is the same year that the Rhine freezes over. These 30,000 Germans are like, we have to go into Rome or we're going to get genocided by Attila. We can't stay here. We have to abandon our homeland. And there's this, if I can find it, I'll read this like beautiful poem about like the loss of the homeland. But they cross, and it just so happened, incidentally, that one of that Stilkio, I think his name is General Stilkio. He's the border general in charge of the Rhine. He's a half Goth or half Vandal, I forget. He's half German, and he happens to be a member of one of the tribes crossing. Just all this happenstance occurrence that happened, everything rightly, like perfectly lining up, and he takes pity on his kin. You know, he's half Roman. He was raised Roman. He's been thoroughly Latinized, but he takes pity on his kin that are about to be genocided, and he essentially allows them to enter peacefully, no fight. And so 30,000 Germans enter Gaul, and the Franks start running the alarm. Like the Franks have been there for about 200 years. It's Gaul, northern Gaul is now basically Frank lands, and they're like, "Excuse me, Emperor, your general has just allowed 30,000 savages over the Rhine into our homeland. What are you doing? Please help. What are you doing?" And the Emperor is a child. I think it was Honoraris or something. I forget, but he doesn't know what's going on. He's feeding chickens, and he doesn't do anything. And so the Franks realize at this point that there may be an emperor, there may be a Roman government, there may be like this thing that you call the Roman Empire, but it doesn't exist anymore. The Roman Empire hasn't fallen yet, but it's gone. No one's gonna come to support you. And so the Franks decide at this point, I think in 406 AD, that henceforth they will have to run Gaul because Rome isn't anymore. It's not that they conquered Gaul, it's that Rome just stopped protecting the border. They stopped being Roman. And so the Franks were like, okay, then we're Roman. And they take up arms. They do lose the battle against the 30,000 Germans. So the entire Frankish race is essentially pushed further into Gaul, and that's how they became France in the mainland. And Gaul is ravaged by these 30,000 refugees that are just like raiding and looking for food because it's the middle of the frozen winter, and then no one's coming to help them. And they've just been allowed to the Roman Empire, and all the wealth of the empire is open to them. And so they just basically decided, well, we're just going to take, because we're starving and we're going to die if we go back. And thus began the first Teutonic royalty of Europe, basically, in the process of their own consolidation of what was left of the Roman Empire. Incidentally, famous people like Elaric, who would go on to sack Rome in 410, I think Theodoric, who would go on to take over Iberia. All those men are young boys in this at 406 AD. They're all in that crowd. These men would enter the Roman Empire, find ways of living in the Roman Empire, Romanize themselves as best they could, and you know, Elaric. It's often drawn as Elaric sacking Rome as a barbarian, but in fact, by the time he sacked Rome in 410, he was a Roman officer. He had joined the Roman army once he came in. He came with Roman soldiers to sack Rome, not Germans.
Well, it brings up an interesting point that essentially that there is something to the fact that the moment you lose authority like that, like the moment you are no longer seen as, I guess, the ultimate decider, that's irrecoverable. Like you can't get back from that.
Yeah,
and I kind of wonder if a similar thing will happen at one of these kind of like outside portions of the U.S. empire, take your pick, where there is one of these situations where it is kind of revealed, and who knows, maybe in 100 years, people will look back and say that's what the fall of Kabul was. But nonetheless, like that moment where essentially everyone realizes like, oh, the crown has well and truly fallen, and all of the respect that kind of like our previous eras, force of arms won us. Well, that's kind of hollowed out at a certain point.
Yeah, the withdrawal from Afghanistan was in 1989, and 2 years later, Soviet Union's gone. It is something that I think it is something that started to happen, and part of the consolidation process is localizing the fight against that to specific pressure points rather than like a broad stroke. Blowing up Germany's pipeline was essentially an assertion that we're not weak. You are still in this empire. What's going on in Ukraine now is essentially the United States telling the Russians we are not backing off. And so you see these points where like the United States is picked several key strategic areas to consolidate. These seem to be like Germany, Ukraine, Taiwan, lesser extent Japan and Korea, and a few other areas where they're going to put all their resources in to maintain order, and then hope that the rest of the region follows suit. But it may not, right? It may, there's an example of that with Andropolis, with Constantinople, where the Romans tried that, failed, and the Goths went on to essentially sack all of Greece, and then withdraw. But that was a point of major turning downward for the Romans. And this happens a lot in history where the author of this theory of catabolic collapse is Greer. I've mentioned him a couple of times. John Michael Greer, the crazy druid that I like to read. But it makes a lot of sense when you start comparing it with what's happening, where there's a clear move. Like, we're paying a lot of attention to where the empire is consolidating its strength, but we're really not paying attention to where it's flatly abandoning areas, just letting them be, and like that's it. Like, they sent the Marines to kick them out of Martha's Vineyard. They didn't send any soldiers to get them out of New York City when they were dropped off, right?
Oh, that's a good point. I actually hadn't really thought of that. Can you think of any other examples off the top of your head of places the regime is pulling back?
There appears to be a strong pullback in, like, for example, like I said, Korea and Japan, they don't seem to care about that much, and that's mostly because they can handle themselves at this point. I don't know why the troops haven't left, but there's not really been a lot of investment and effort into those regions. Like, we've completely ignored North Korea's aggression this last year, just completely ignored it. We're just not paying attention to it. There's been absolutely no attempt to barter with North Korea. There's been no attempt to diplomatically arrange things. North Korea has pretty frequently launched missiles over the Japanese Sea, and it's just been lost in the news cycle. No one cares. So we appear to have just more or less told Japan and Korea, handle it, we're done, and focused more on Taiwan and the southern Chinese Sea region.
So I've got a question for you, because this is always something I guess not struggle with, but I feel a tension there. How do you kind of square the circle of, on one hand, being kind of like a right-wing, pronomian, so to speak? It's GN, so gnomes, we're pro-gnomes here. And then on the other end, essentially kind of like, cheering for the collapse of, the American empire.
I don't cheer the collapse of the American empire. I cheer the collapse of one faction in the empire. In the same way that if I was in the year 4 or 6, I would cheer for the Franks. I wouldn't care about the Italians. The Italians wouldn't exist yet, the Latins of Italy. Because I would be aware that the vital essence of civilization would have moved from Italy to Gaul. Gaul now held that vital essence, and people were willing to build and design things. I would throw my lot in with the Visigoths and with the Franks, because these are people that want to build. There are letters by kings of the Visigoths and kings of the Ostrogoths, trading letters between, there's letters of I think it's Theodoric. There's two Theodorics. There's an Iberian Theodoric king, and then there's an Ostrogothic Theodoric king. They're confusing, but there are letters of Theodoric when he conquered Italy. I think in like the 480s or something. Maybe later. Maybe I'm thinking 540s. I forget. But he wrote letters to the Visigoths. Like this, these are like Visigoths and Ostrogoths. They're both Goths, but Western Goths, Eastern Goths. They started differentiating as a culture, and he wrote these letters to them like, hey, we might have conquered this. They don't use the word conquer. What they say is, brother, we are co-heirs of the empire. The phrase that they refuse to say that they conquered the Roman Empire. They would call themselves co-heirs. And so that they would say, like, brother, you are a co-heir of the empire. You have a responsibility to finance the rebuilding of Rome. And so that's how they would, like, regularly, the Ostrogothic rulers of Italy would write letters to the Visigoths and be like, we know you have money. You need to help rebuild this crumbling empire so we can keep managing things. I would put my line, because if I was in that time period, I wouldn't want the Roman Empire to collapse. I would want the dead, moribund like Italian, Latin like bureaucratic offices to collapse because these are worthless people. They're vipers. The Germans are cleaning up shop. They're where the civilization is now.
So first, I'm going to answer this question from Blackwater. Help a boomer out. What's the origin of the gnome meme here? Essentially, in Moldbug and a couple other people, they refer to the right as pronomian, so essentially pro order, and that's nomos, right, from the Greek, and that sounds like GNOME, and so someone in chat started, I don't know, somehow like an hour and a half ago talking about gnomes, and yeah, I don't know. There's no way to explain it better than that.
There's a lot of gnome deep lore that primarily originates from Fossington.
Yes. So I've got a question, right? If you consider yourself someone who's kind of cheering for one faction against the other, where do you consider kind of like the vital force within our empire?
I mean, unfortunately, it seems to be the technocrats in like Musk and that lot. I don't like that, but they're the ones building. I am hoping that within the next few years, you'll start seeing other new factions start to rise. Like if we can, I hate to compare it with the Roman Empire over and over again. I'm not a Roman nerd. I promise. We need a word for weeb.
Blue Templar, I think you might be a Roman nerd. I don't mean to burst your bubble here.
Yeah. So like the Franks were the first to acquire that vital essence to rebuild and build, but within a century, it was also the Goths. It was also the Lombards, even the Vandals. While they were destroying things, they also were starting to rebuild things. The German horde, those 30,000 individuals. Again, I like to play numbers here. There were 30,000 men who crossed the Rhine in 406. There were probably somewhere in the range of 30 to 40 million people in Western Europe, and upwards of 700,000 legionnaires still operating. The numbers were grossly against those 30,000, incredibly against them, like fractions of percent, I think. And yet they won. They ultimately conquered all of Western Europe and became the Teutonic nobility for the next 1,000 years, the next 1,200 years actually. Why is that? Because they had this vital spirit that comes and goes as God chooses. In terms of the American Empire, like you can see it starting to emerge in people like Musk and like even Bezos a little bit. They're kind of the transitionary power. I'm hoping that within the next few years, I'll see other groups start to arise. I don't know how, because again, in that time period in the Dark Ages, the primary avenue of acquiring this vital civilizational force was the willingness to use the sword, and in a noble way. They weren't like these were the Germans who didn't just go raiding because they were blood-bound warriors who chose honor, and they chose to be faithful to their commands. Initially through Arianism, and then eventually through Catholic Christianity. What that is like in this culture, you can't use any sword currently as a civilian without having like insane amount of legal problems follow you. We're not at the point of a collapse yet where people have to hire private soldiers. I think there's a fire going on outside, but we're getting close to there. I can't yet say who, so for now I'm just throwing my lot in with people like Musk, but I'm aware that they're a transitionary force that's going to eventually whittle out and be replaced by something else.
Well, I know what you mean, that there almost seems to be like a technocrat adjacent force that's maybe not as explicitly technocratic in the WEF sense, but is more technocratic along the like Elon Musk, Peter Thiel variety. Because I would argue that some people would say, well, they would use technocrats to refer to people like people like Fink and people like Schwab. And I would argue that while that is a technocratic not fascist, that is a technocratic faction, there also seems to be some significant disagreement between the billionaires. And I wonder if we're kind of seeing, a jockeying for position to a certain degree.
Yeah. The move to, so do you know what a federati is?
No, I do not.
Federati was the legal framework, the legal framework by which the Germans legally took over the Roman Empire. Federatis were a contract that the Romans would give. It originates from when the Roman Republic was only ruling Italy. They would sign federatises to neighboring cities and tribes to be, friends of Rome, basically. Like, hey, Samaritans, hey, Sicilians, you're not Romans, you're not part of our empire, but you're going to receive the benefit of our authority over you, basically. One of the early examples of a federatus was I think the Gauls, actually, of all people. There were Latin. It originated in the Latin tribes around Rome, and what it was basically, it was a form of private city, or private tribal city, more like it, where the federatus was granted its own government, its own semi-sovereign state. They had to pay taxes to Rome, and they had to supply Rome with soldiers when needed. In exchange for that, they were kind of like allowed a significant amount of authority. And Latin, despite drawing a map of the Roman Republic, most of the Roman Republic was federatises up into the Caesar days, or not Caesar days, right before Caesar's time. Most of Italy was not actually part of the Roman Republic. They were federatises of the Roman Republic, and then later on they became proper Roman Republic senatorial entities. In the same way, America is kind of doing that, in the sense that, like, Musk got a kind of federatus on America's space agency. NASA wasn't doing much, so we essentially sold or privatized our space agency to Musk, to SpaceX. And so SpaceX is a kind of federati of America's aerospace industry. Ford is a kind of federatus of America's car industry. And you'll start seeing more of that. Like even with federatises in the real life, they started as peaceful contracts, but by the times of the 400 AD, oftentimes Germans would invade Rome aggressively, fight and win a war, and then the peace term was, "Hey, we're federatises now." They were fighting for the right to enter the empire. They weren't fighting to conquer the empire; they were fighting right to have a federatus contract. And you can almost parallel that with what Musk did with Twitter. If you think of Twitter as America's propaganda bureau, Elon Musk essentially conquered it and made it into a federatus entity for himself. You'll probably start seeing more operations like that, of this, part of the process of consolidation is areas that are abandoned or harder to manage can be sold off to private allies rather than directly managed by the state. In the same way that Federatus allowed Rome to, sign off Iberia to the Visigoths, Gaul to the Franks. Hey, you guys are in charge now. Pay your taxes, give us soldiers, and just don't bother us. That's essentially what America is doing with large chunks of its infrastructure and institutions. We're privatizing them. Yep.
Well, and there's another thing to be said, in the sense that, people always talk about, like, oh, well, power wants to consolidate itself, which is true, right? That decentralized systems are, kind of inherently unstable. But the other thing is that humans are inherently self-interested. And the reason that we didn't effectively, enter a gridlock state 2,000 years ago, is that a combination of entropy and human self-interest ensures that there's kind of a hard limit on, the amount of centralization that can occur. Just because, one, like the limits of human cognition, and also just the fact that there are always kind of like rival power groups who want their own piece of the pie, and so to me, right, I see it, I very much see what you're kind of getting at, that it does seem like there are kind of people at the fringes of this who, much like they have a contract where it says, like, yeah, I'm still part of your system. But really, how much, when it comes down to it, how much are they? And I think you're right that, Musk is someone who, people have correctly identified that he is within the system to a certain degree, right? That he gets his wealth from the system. He gets, his contracts from the system. But he's valuable enough that he can push the boundaries more than, you or I can. And I think that, we will also see that happen with kind of like the more populous and more remote states when it comes to places like, California, Florida, Texas, who do have enough sway that the people there have kind of a vested interest in, making their own interests foremost.
Yeah, and this is something which I want to see people like Ron DeSantis push. Like, there's technically nothing stopping several states from deciding, hey, we're going to make like based states version of the FBI, and it'll only operate in Texas and Florida, and we'll just like kind of kick the FBI out of certain areas, and it'll just be like a parallel government. There's nothing technically saying you can't do that. And in fact, if you had a president who was your ally, you could probably get a sort of like, you know, if states decide to create a state level institution, then the federal government must get out. That could be an executive order, because there's nothing really like constitutionally stopping that. That's the kind of like, you know, I, the president, have granted these states to essentially make a local version of the FBI that they manage directly, so the FBI can do less work there. Nothing stops that, and that's part of the consolidation pressure, which I do expect stuff like that to eventually happen. It's not happening yet. It'd be cool if it would happen, but it hasn't happened yet. And essentially, I would actually ask this. You know, if I was an alien coming into the 500s, and I was visiting Spain, and I was visiting the nobility, and the nobility were like, "Oh, we have to pay these taxes to Constantinople, and we have to give them soldiers," and, you know, they kind of still run some of the cities along the coast, but they give us a lot of freedom here and there. I, as an alien, would view that as, oh, I see. So you're kind of like the a autonomous region within this empire. Even though today, when we draw the maps, we say that the Visigothic kingdom was like this. It was a kingdom, right? Like an independent state. When it really wasn't. It kind of really wasn't, and it never really was an independent state. It was, you know, the Visigoths always had to pay their taxes to Constantinople. They had to like send money to Rome to fund rebuilding the city, be it under Ostrogoth or Byzantine Empire. The Byzantines would frequently intervene in their royal arrangements and intervene with who was king. Occasionally, the Byzantines would just invade and be like, "Yeah, you're not going to be king. Sorry, bye." If I was an alien, I would say, "Oh, Spain or Visigoth. The Visigoths are this like tribe that is under the suzerainty of Rome." I see. Even though today, when we were drawing it, we'd say it was an independent state, and we'd kind of make a fiction of an independent state. In the same way, is there any difference between that arrangement with something like Florida and what they're doing? I would say there's not much difference. In many ways, some states are already operating as if they are the Visigoths, or as if they are the Ostrogoths, where they're essentially running their states either in direct violation of federal law without consequence, or starting to edge a little closer. Go-to example, this is weed. Weed is technically illegal, and states just like, it's not illegal here, we don't care. And the federal government is just like, this isn't worth fighting over. We're just gonna take the L here and abandon this issue. That's gonna grow once you start once you backtrack like that, you're losing power and you don't even know it, and it's gonna grow. People are gonna push the boundaries of that.
Well, right, and it very much goes back to, you know, what you said. Essentially, once it became clear that the Romans had ceded authority in a big way, they essentially lost the right. And I think you kind of see the same thing, where essentially that it sounds douchey and it sounds like, you know, like it's kind of self-helpy, but essentially, like, once you back down, you lose authority in a wide variety of places. And to me, I think that, like, the big consolidation of, you know, America, you know, we're during the, you know, the 30s, and then again during the 60s. Okay, fair enough. That was an incredible power grab. And even recently, sorry, there's a train going by for those who can hear it. You know, recently there was another power grab, but the problem is that essentially, I don't know how to say this delicately, but they just the bureaucracy is no longer nearly as high quality as it used to be. You know, This is not like me, you know, idealizing bureaucracy, because especially like if you look back even just like 120 years ago, you know, there were just as many, you know, articles written about, oh, the postal service is full of, you know, lazy do-nothings. So that the bureaucrats are an eternal menace. But what I mean is that we kind of have two, you know, conflicting trends. Where on one hand, you know, the regime, for a variety of reasons, is pushing out competent people and bringing in and promoting people of limited competence. And then on the other end, dramatically increasing the demands of management, right? They're creating more and more areas that need to be managed. And I think that a lot of the push towards essentially like, shall we say, like I forget the exact term. You'll have to correct me on this, but the idea of like comprehensive artificial intelligence, not just an algorithm, but a truly like, self-improving artificial intelligence is essentially regime copium, where they're kind of like, we don't know how to solve this problem of needing more and more human IQ to just manage the population at large. And so we don't really know how we're going to fix this. So computer God will save us.
Yeah.
But to me, it's why I don't think, and I want to go back to just wrap this up, or saying with Oros, where it's like, I kind of look at this like the Tower of Babel, where I think that they have very grand designs for the future that do sound kind of hellish and awful, but I legitimately don't think they're smart enough to pull it off.
Yeah, there's a I don't know if I've mentioned it last time I was on this stream, but there's like a biblical parallel with the Tower of Babel with bricks versus stones. Do you know about this? This is actually a really cool little architecture thing.
No, but carry on. It sounds interesting.
I
think you did mention it, but it was in a private chat on Telegram, so you should release this publicly because it was an interesting idea.
Well, I did write a Substack on this like a year ago, but if you look at all the instances of a bad power structure in the Bible, they're always described as using bricks. And if you look at things like the Temple of the Lord, be it like the actual temple, or more accurately the living stones of Christ's kingdom, it's always stones. And the reason for this is that bricks, it specifically says when the Tower of Babel was being made that they were bricks. They were all brick makers. All the bricks were the same. All the bricks, they all spoke the same language. They all made the same bricks. And so there's a strong poetic structure that the bricks basically represent Babylonians. It's not, they're not yet Babylonians. And the Tower of Babel is made of bricks. They're all the same single thing. And there's I'm in architecture, so I get a lot of this wisdom by watching bricklayers and stone layers. Bricklayers don't think. They never think. They just take the brick, stack it, coat the mortar, stack. No thought goes into a brick. There's no intelligence at all. It's a really dumb task. Stonemasons have to have some intelligence because they have to figure out how the stones go together in a tectonic way, and you kind of have to like trust the stonemason to like know what he's doing, because if he fucks up, the wall's gonna fall down. And the stonemason has to basically form a relationship with every single stone he lays. He has to look at the stone, rotate it around, see where it goes, chip off parts that stick out, make sure the pieces come together in the right shape. And so it makes sense why the Temple of the Lord is made of stones versus the Tower of Babel made of bricks, because the people of Babel are all being monolithed into a single entity to reach the heavens, this like utopic vision, whereas the Temple of the Lord, the living stones of Christ, there has to be some effort to make the stones work together, otherwise it's going to fall apart. You have to make them like hold together. And one of the interesting architectural consequences of this is that a stone wall will always outlast a brick wall, because a brick wall, once the water gets into the seams, the brick wall starts popping. The bricks just every winter a brick pops out because the pressure when the water gets in the mortar. And this is inevitable. It will always happen. Bricks are cheap and they'll last maybe a century, but they break really quick once they start weakening. Stones will last centuries. They'll last 1,000 years sometimes. And there's a lot of wisdom in this and in comparing it. And if you view God's promises against the Tower of Babel as eternal rather than a one-off, then you have confidence that God will regularly tear down any attempt at a Tower of Babel. Whenever a power structure starts to develop a monolithic entity where it forces everyone to be the same shape, no thinking, rapid work, GDP go up basically thinking, God will rip that down. He won't allow it. He won't tolerate these utopic delusions to get to heaven. And it's for our own good, in my opinion. Like, good. I hope he rips it down. And if you look at history, this seems to be the truth. Like whenever humanity moves to this brick monolithic model, it doesn't really last that long. It never lasts that long. That form of government lasts a century. It's a form of preventing collapse when it starts. But when you have these like I'll call them let's call them stone confederates, right? Like when you got these stonewall confederates, like confederations of different unique entities that bind together in the ways that they work. It's a strong system. It lasts centuries. I've been seeing in different Telegram chats like people discovering the fact that God says different groups of people have different skills and weaknesses. It's like God does not have this universal man model in the Bible. He doesn't describe universal man model. He says those people are prone to thievery. Those people are prone to really stupid thinking. Like he insults. God has a lot of racist jokes in Psalms and Proverbs, and he also has a lot of positive things, like that people group are commendable because they're loyal. That people group are commendable because they have beautiful song. And he's not like gonna fully, he's not gonna like say you're awful or you're perfect. He's gonna say like your tribe has found these characteristics. I made it that way. Fulfill your characteristics. Be a thing. And one of the other ways this manifests in scripture is the often use of animal symbolism for different people groups. Like with the vision of Daniel and his animals, like the beasts represent different kingdoms, the coming together different tribes to form a conglomerate empire, form these like hybrid animals with like wings and different animal parts. God does not seem to view humanity as this universal man. He seems to say, I made tribes, they have skills, they have deficiencies. They are to find these out with relation with each other and work together and seek me to fix these problems or resolve these differences in a creative way. And I think this is why the Temple of the Lord is a stone rather than a brick, because mankind is not all the same. They are unique and they have qualities that need to be worked on to build. And anytime an empire has acknowledged this and sought to structure itself accordingly, it lasts for centuries. Whenever an empire forms this utopic delusion of a Tower of Babel to the stars, it very rarely lasts longer than 100 years or so. I mean, that's my little spiel.
Well, it brings up several interesting things, which first I'll connect it to something that I bring up all the time, which is that in all the King's Men, right, kind of the character who sets the whole plot off, Willie Stark, he's catapulted from being kind of a small town official to a gubernatorial candidate because he staked his career as a county treasurer on opposing the building of a local school that was built with cheap brick. And so he basically sacrificed his career, basically saying like, over my dead body, you won't use this corrupt government contractor to build the school. And then what happens is that the cheap brick, much like you said, starts to fail. And 6 years later, in a fire drill, right, the kids are all out on the fire escape, and the fire escape pulls out from the brick, and he's vindicated. And again, it's an interesting point, right, that bricks do fail, one way or another. There's no way around it. And that's just what popped into my head. But you bringing up the animal attributes is actually quite a common motif in ancient literature. And again, I realize the last thing everyone wants to listen to is to a stream evolve into horny posting. But to me, it reminds me very much of something that is held in common between Song of Solomon and Ovid, right? When in each case, the way that these two, the two poets, obviously from different cultures, but both Mediterranean, describe the certain aspects of women as they use analogies to animals. Like the famous example from Solomon is I think it's like breasts like a nestling deer or something like that, which is probably quite arousing in in the ancient Levant. But nonetheless, right, like there's this rich, I guess, like layer of analogy that is kind of lost outside of cultural context. And my favorite example in this, in specifically, the Old Testament, is the way that the serpent is described in Hebrew, right? And essentially the way that it's done, and I stole this from a book that I can't remember the name of. Essentially, that in many when Hebrew was being written, a lot of times the vowels would be kind of stylistically left out. Yeah. So it was kind of this elision where you could read in multiple meanings because the consonants would be there, but the vowels wouldn't. And so it created this kind of like layered meaning. And so, for instance, right, like the Hebrew word for serpent was kind of a onomatopoeia, where it was a lot of, and I don't speak Hebrew, despite, the things said about me. And essentially it's a lot of like S's, and it basically was the sound a snake makes, so the word for serpent is the sound a snake makes. But those same collection of consonants written a certain way also mean the devil, and also mean the bringer of light, and also mean essentially like an attractive shyster all at once. So there's this like,
I forget.
Yeah, there's this like multiplicity of meaning, and this is pretty common in, ancient literature. And I think stuff like that is just incredibly fascinating because and look, like I love the King James Bible as much as the next man, but like you just cannot translate that into another language. Like there really is something to be gotten from reading, these texts in the original language.
And just a word of caution to people that want to say, oh, why are they kvetching about the Jews again? This was a tradition held by many language groups in that region. You can find it also in Egyptian. You can find it in Anatolian Hittite, the Caucasus, the Aramaic Syrian. This was a regional approach that even the Greeks somewhat adopted in different ways. It dies out as you go towards the Roman Empire, sadly, but it was a very beautiful way of writing, I think.
Oh, definitely. And you see it as well. Like one of my least favorite, like Reddit, atheist takes is like, oh, well, how come in the Bible they talk about killing all the Hittites and then the Hittites show up in the next chapter?
Yeah.
And like that's such a moronic take because, look, like if you've ever read or even experienced like ancient Near Eastern writing, like what the Assyrians would write, and the Assyrians were absolute savages in the sense that they would essentially
I've been
genocide everyone, steal their skin, and nail it to the front door. Which
I've been to the British Museum where there's
it's super cool.
Have you seen that Lotan relief where they show it vividly? You walk into the room and it's just like surrounded by death and crucifixion.
And you're like, well, I mean, damn, it worked. But nonetheless, right, the way that was written, it is written like the Old Testament. It would say things like, I, by the might of my right hand, smote them and, drove them from their cities. No stone was left, standing on another. And it was essentially the way you described battles, right? Like, it's just what you did. And much like how if you read enough, Assyrian text, which I'll be honest, I'm no ancient scholar, you notice a similar thing where these people end up coming back 10 years later. And it's because, no, they didn't literally, make sure every stone was, it's just as idiomatic as saying like, oh, like how'd your rec league, soccer game go? Oh, we slaughtered them. It's like, no, you didn't literally, but it's how people communicate. And there's been kind of an unfortunate trend in, especially like Protestant circles, to over relativize the Bible. Basically like, oh, well, the Jefferson Bible approach of like, well, nothing really happened. It's all just layers of, metaphor and, like read in meaning. And that's not what I mean. But in a desire to avoid that, people have overlooked kind of this like rich, deep meaning, that is really cultural. And you do need kind of a more like thorough study to get that extra layer from.
Yeah, I have different poetic readings in a lot of the areas. Like my most controversial view is that there is a possibility that the flood was actually the sea people and it was a flood of people, not water, but it doesn't work linguistically. It just happens to be at the same time period, and it just happens to be like people from the sea flood everybody and flood them with crazy pagan beliefs. But that's my little conspiracy theory, which is probably wrong, speculation, and very wrong. But you do see a lot of beautiful poetic imagery, like biblical. Whenever people yell about like, "Oh, is it literal or is it symbolic?" I'm like, "It's poetic. Shut up." Like, it could be both. It doesn't have to be limited. The idea that the text has to be either literal or symbolic is a medieval invention. People back then didn't think that way. They wrote poetry based off what they saw before them, wanting to illustrate like their emotions that they experienced through the thing.
One other thing that frustrates me is people act very much in the same way like there are defined areas of history that genre is a invention. They're like when you read, especially like the ancient Greek stuff, like, well, there was no real neat divide between prose, poetry, history, and fiction. It was kind of all mixed up at once. Like, okay, well, Troy was really destroyed. Well, did it happen like that? Well, probably not. And so and you see this in Herodotus, and I love Herodotus because Herodotus is, to a certain extent, right, the father of history. But nonetheless, there's stuff in there that you're like, okay, man, I know you didn't conquer the Egyptians by like throwing cats at them. I just refuse to believe it. But someone conquered the Egyptians, and it's this like overly like binary view where, the ancients had a similar system where they would go to, the ancient library and there was a box for history, a box for poetry, and one for just like fact. And really, and maybe this is an overly, I'm not going to qualify that the concept of history is sort of a Western invention, not in the sense that other cultures don't keep history, but they just keep it. They don't have the same like academic system for keeping history, right? Like the famous example is like so much of Indian history is essentially a mystery because they just kind of hadn't like unlocked that part of the tech tree yet.
Yeah, I mean, like you're reading through that the slave driver. I'm making you read through Body Problem, but like they don't have a linear system of history in that book.
Right. Yeah, and I will say I finished it. I finally finished it.
Yeah, they have these like compartmentalized eras that one not follows the other. They're like people are. It's funny how like they bring that in because that's from the Chinese dynastics view, where history doesn't have a year zero that goes forward. It has eras that are clearly demarked between well, are we in the era of heavenly favor or the era of heavenly disfavor, and then that will repeat back and forth in a forward view. It's like a spiral view of history. I kind of like the spiral view where you have elements of the cyclical view, and you can kind of say you're somewhat linear, but you're going to go around in circles until you figure it out. An old Aramaic speaker explained this to me. The way in which Hebrew works is kind of like this, where you come to a tree, you see the tree, you describe the tree. The next day you come to the tree, and you try to describe it again, but now you're going to notice a few more details. You're going to start describing the leaves and the bark, and you leave for the day. The next day you come back and you start noticing, the tree has things alive in it, squirrels and birds. Oh, look, the leaves have different structure. And every time you come to the tree, you are progressing, but you're also in a cyclical model. And as you go through the cycles, your view of the thing increases. Your understanding of the concept increases. This is a very uniquely, I'm going to say, Samaritan Aramaic view of history that some of the Jewish people inherited when they were conquered. I wouldn't really say that this is a Jewish or Semitic view of history. This is really a Syrian view that developed in the gardens of Babylon that the Jews kind of adopted. The Aramaic guy who taught me this, he was from Syria, and he kind of loved. He could speak Aramaic, and so he would love reading the Bible, and it's what he thought was the original language of Jesus. And so, like, whenever people complained to him about translation issues, he would just jokingly say, "I don't need to translate."
Right.
But,
I can just read it originally.
Yeah. Anyway, but like that spiral view, or I don't know what to say it, but I find that view to be extremely beautiful for gaining wisdom and knowledge. Come to things multiple times throughout your week in a cyclical but linear fashion, a progressively cyclical way, and you'll really develop a wisdom of the thing itself, a mastery of it, that you'll find that allows you to describe the thing in beautiful language that is neither symbolic nor literal. It's poetic, and it can really work with both models.
So I want to jump in on that, but I just want one little bit of housekeeping because a bunch of people have jumped on. I assume since not into the back room, into the actual stream. I assume that Auron's stream must have ended. But anyway, guys, if you want to hop on to chat, I'm here pretty much all evening, and you can just click the link that I've pinned in the chat, and you can just hop in, and I'll let you on sooner or later. But until then, Templar, I'm all yours, so we can keep going.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
It's something, and I like this. This is kind of one of the most salient observations that Orwell has, that essentially language shapes your capacity to understand and to express ideas, right? And the ability in learning a language, you almost kind of develop a new way to conceptualize reality.
Yeah.
And I noticed this because I'm actually a very poor student of language. In college, I was actually kicked out of, not like I failed out, but the professors told me I should leave of 2 different languages, right? It's just not something I could do. But I was a pretty good student of Latin because I didn't have to speak it, And once you read Latin, you understand very quickly the amount of just pure dedicated autism the Romans possessed. Because Latin, and not in every case, but in most cases, is the most mathematical language possible. So I learned both Latin and Greek, in a sense, forgotten all of them, right? But nonetheless, right, the difference between Latin and Greek, which from the outside, you're like, oh, those are 2 very similar cultures, are indescribably different in construction. Obviously, they affected one another. But in Latin, essentially, like a like a child's understanding of Latin can get you pretty far. Like realistically, like you know the basic rules, and okay, fair enough. Maybe you don't understand some obscure, poetic allusion in, Virgil or whatnot. You can kind of make your way along. Whereas in Greek, right, it's one of the most incredibly, and the Greek I learned was admittedly not classical. It was, the New Testament Greek, so not the most complicated, but it's incredibly irregular. Yes, Minoan Greek. It was incredibly irregular. And so that same level of understanding, that would have taken you maybe a year or two for Latin, that gets you, instead of to the 80% mark, that gets you to the 10% mark. And that remaining 90% is entirely irregular, and it's all like special cases and just exceptions. But the thing about it is it's incredibly beautiful. It's like, it's a weirdly poetic language. And Latin, even when there's Latin poetry, and some of Latin poetry, to put it like in an understatement, is incredibly, beautiful, but nonetheless, right, it's the languages are so different in construction, and you see that in the thinkers who wrote in those tongues, right? They conceptualize reality differently. And I think that, much like you said about your Aramaic friend, is you kind of can't understand everything baked into a work until you've read it firsthand. And I say this as someone who is very unskilled at language, right?
Oh, did you cut off?
No, sorry. I finished that thought. I've been streaming for 2.5 hours, so not exactly at my A game, right?
No worries. Yeah, I mean, I one of the people that got me into this thinking is actually Peter Hitchens, because he has a whole spiel about Russia not having a word for safety. and instead they have to negate the word dangerous as bezopast, I think it is. And so there's like technically no, opast means dangerous, and bezopast, bez is like their like non-prefix. So like bezopast is not dangerous. They don't actually have a word for safety. They have a prefix. And so Peter Hitchens has this kind of like psycho-historical theory that because you have to put the work into negating danger, that the Russian mind doesn't comprehend safety as a default existence, but rather something that takes effort. Which kind of explains all their history, but that's a bit too far for me. It's like, oh, come on, they can conceptualize safety. I'm sure there's a child in Russia that wasn't raped and pillaged by Mongols at some point in history. They understood safety. But the language just doesn't record that experience. It's the language kind of records the experience of living on the steppes and regularly being sacked and raided by foreigners. Of course you wouldn't have a word for safety. You don't know it. But I've been getting into like Old English a lot too, and I think I mentioned the English project a few times, where they're attempting to like de-Francify the English language by going back to the word stock before the Norman invasion. It's like, what was English before the French influence? And there's a lot of really interesting. There are interesting alternative ways to construct words with that, where it kind of reveals a different way of thinking of the original, almost like the original Anglo-Saxon view of history, somewhat. There's I did a podcast with disgraced propagandists about this, about like the differences between French stock words and Anglo-Saxon stock words, and how that's played into things like propaganda and things like Churchill, when he was giving speeches, if he was speaking to a lower class audience, he would use Saxon words. If he was speaking to the intellectuals, he would use Norman words, and he was aware that you played this out, because the Norman words are disrespected by the Saxon base population, but loved by the intellectuals, and the Saxon words are hated by the intellectuals, but loved by the lower classes. And so
you see that very cleanly in table versus field words, right? It's the difference between pig and pork, cow and beef. The language of the people who worked the field versus those that kind of ate the fruits of it, so to speak. But carry on, man.
No, that's a good example I hadn't thought about before. That's another example. And you kind of get the sense of like a different things like that. Like another example, going back to like Semitic languages. I as far as I can tell from what I've looked at in the Old Testament, they don't really have a word for the appearance of things. They have words for the function of things. And one of the consequences of that is like, they have one word that you use for pen, pencil, paintbrush, stylus. It's all one word because it's the function, not the form. The Syrian guy told me this, like what differentiates Aramaic from Hebrew It's basically the same words, but the way in which you use them is like form versus function. Obviously, modern Hebrew is significantly reconstructed, and so it doesn't share this ancient tradition. But classical Hebrew has this nature of you might find this funny, but the word for angel, the word for king, and the word for messenger are more or less the same word, because they're functionally the same thing. If you're a king, if you're an angel, or if you're a messenger, your job is the same. You're delivering God's justice or word or promise to the people. That's your job. So it's all the same word. There's vowel differences, but consonant wise, it's all the same word. Malek, Malik, Malike. It's all the same. Arabic also borrows this word as well. And you start noticing this a lot with Ark of the Covenant, the word for containing all the animals in Noah, and the word for containing the Ten Commandments. I think it's the same word, Ark, that gets translated. I'm pretty sure it's the same word. I don't know for sure. Tabernacle. Hebrew has these very weird same word for a thing that is formally, like the way it looks and appears, radically different. Like a boat is clearly not a box, but functionally it is. Functionally, it's the same thing. And so Hebrew has this very heavy function emphasis where the words are used to describe a function. And likewise, this is why it's really interesting. Like the atheists are always bitching and moaning about, oh, haha, your Bible categorizes bats and birds in the same group. They're not even the same family of species. Darwin wins. But why would they? Their language doesn't give a shit about the DNA. Their language is concerned about the function. Both of those creatures fly, and so they're both the same word.
Well, also that this is what drives me crazy is that in the eternal Aristotle versus Plato debate, I consider myself more on the Aristotelian side, but there is definitely a mental trap in the sense that just because you've created a category that is a classification tool, that is not an inherent fact about the object. And again, it's a, and I don't want to sound like a lib with this one, but you are kind of exporting your own cultural perspective on categories to people who viewed reality fundamentally differently. And especially coming from kind of the big brain, cultural relativist types, it just doesn't make sense. And again, I don't want to just endlessly complain about shit libs because it's not particularly productive, but nonetheless, it's always something that has kind of bothered me.
Yeah, in terms of Christianity, this is one of the reasons why I feel really uncomfortable, despite my attraction to the Orthodox faith. I don't feel comfortable ever becoming Orthodox because I am kind of concerned about what does the Greek lens do to Christianity that got lost from the Aramaic. Because in very early Christian history, the church basically split, with some Christians going east, like Thomas into India, and I think Philip into Africa, and then Paul went west into Greece and Rome with others, and that philosophical split, as a result, we translate certain words as logos, and that comes with a lot of philosophical baggage from the Greeks that may not necessarily carry over into the Aramaic, into the other languages. And so, while I love the Orthodox approach to Christianity, and I feel like it's probably a lot closer to truth than other groups, I am really concerned about that Greek lens. I'm worried that you're kind of allowing certain philosophical baggage in from a pagan culture that may not have a proper understanding of certain terms. I mean, granted, the people that spoke Hebrew and Aramaic and other languages, they didn't have a problem translating it as logos. So, okay, fine. But there's still that part of me that's just suspicious a little bit.
Well, I've noticed a similar thing. So, a lot of my very close, reactionary friends are Orthodox. Bagby, my long-term mentor, he's Orthodox. And so I've been to his parish several times. And from what I understand, there is a divide in Orthodoxy between essentially the ethnic Orthodox and the converts. And a large part of that has to do with Eastern versus Western perspective. And even within converts, and I say this as someone who is, excuse me, who is an outsider, right? I don't pretend to have a, firsthand, I guess, understanding of this. But there also seems to be a debate about, well, how much of Orthodoxy is an explicit rejection of the West? And you'll get different answers on that.
Yeah.
But it's something that I've noticed as well. It is, and look, I'm very much Protestant, but to a certain extent, the Orthodox are Protestants and Catholics, even though they are kind of defined by opposition, have more in common than either do with the Orthodox. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, and this is something that a lot of Protestants don't get because they've really only dealt with other Protestants or Catholics. But Protestantism is significantly reliant on Catholic orthodoxy, if you will.
Definitely. Like it is in many ways an explicit return to Augustinianism.
Yeah. There, you wouldn't be that far off to call certain branches of Protestantism as essentially Augustinianism as a sect. And in many ways, I would prefer to go by philosophical roots. Like one of the macro projects I've always wanted to do, and this would be like a pretty hard thing, but I've always wanted to construct a philosophical genealogy of who taught who from the apostles to the reformers. Because I'm pretty sure you could do it if you put the effort into it. It would require a lot of research, but I'm pretty sure you could create an unbroken line of teachers from the apostles to the reformers, and thereby understand what groups of Protestants come from what philosophical roots.
So sorry, before we go on, I realize I've been mischaracterized. I want to state what I meant very clearly. What I meant is that there are some people who turn to Orthodoxy as an explicit rejection of Western civilization. They essentially view the rot that we currently face as going all the way back to the schism between East and West. That's not a majority position, but it is a position I have heard expressed by some people. Sorry, that I just want to clarify because I may have misstated something.
And it's weird because like Western civilization is built on the foundation of the Greeks, and so it's silly to reject Western civilization based off of what it was built off of. Like, it makes no sense.
Right, and it's not a position I agree with or one that I find particularly convincing, but it is a opinion some people hold.
Yeah, I
that for a qualified endorsement.
Yeah, and that way of thinking, you do either end up basically like there's only two conclusions from that. You either end up Orthodox or like Norse paganism. It seems like that's the only two groups that come out of that way of thinking.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Incidentally, I was starting some shit earlier this week by pointing out that Thor is probably a Hittite god.
Tell me more on that. I'm always interested in that.
well, yeah. Well, this is because I've been wanting for a while now to write a thorough, connected to the philosophical genealogy project. I want to do a deity genealogy project of tracing out where these Indo-European gods come from, and if I could possibly link them to sons of Noah. I have already linked a few of them. Like I think I found Kronos or his dad. Oh, someone. There's a giant named Japheth in Greek mythology who I think gave birth to Kronos. I forget. I really don't remember. But Japheth, of course, is the same spelling as Japheth that we say in English, the son of Noah. And you can start seeing Noah had a son of named Yavan, and in Greek this is near exactly the same as Ion, the son of one of those Greek gods. And so you start noticing, and if you look into a lot of the rabbinical thinking, a lot of the rabbis blatantly say, yeah, a lot of these sons of Noah we just took from the Greek gods. Like, these are just Greek gods that we wanted to reference and say that they were sons of Noah. Like, the rabbi just basically say that these names are explicitly from Greek origin. We wanted to explain where these gods come from. We think they come from the sons of Noah. Or some of them come from pre-Diluvian people that were remembered by the sons of Noah, and then their traditions were carried over through the flood. And so I do want to try to do this with a lot of the Indo-European gods. But anyway, in the Hittite religion, there's a god, Tharhuna, who also had a hammer, who was also the god of thunder, also battled the serpent, and whose father was also into magic and is depicted as an old man in a cloak with a bird, like similar Odin and his crow. I forget I think it may be the Babylonian god Kini or something. But essentially, like most of the Norse religion can be traced back to the Hittites, and somewhat the Babylonians, and it makes sense. Nordic Bronze Age, they were. If you look at the bronze that they find in archaeology, the bronze comes from Cyprus. It's a specific type of bronze that comes from Cyprus, because the Bronze Age bronze trade was extensive. It's incredibly long how long these trade routes go. And so the people living in the Norse Bronze Age were essentially importing their bronze from Cyprus, right next to where the cult of Thorhuna was. So, okay, the traders brought the stories of Thorhuna to the Norse. The Norse adopted them as their gods. And if you look at the archaeological evidence, there's really no evidence of Thor or Odin prior to this trade route. Before that trade route, they were mostly worshipping deers and songbirds related to weather patterns, like the appearance of spring. And so there's a lot of evidence that the Norse were originally worshipping water birds and deer and a spring cult, and then probably related to the Bronze Age collapse, when the weather started destabilizing, those gods stopped, giving good weather, and so they started looking for other gods, and these strong Hittite gods along the trade routes with Cyprus sounded cooler. Man with hammered battling snakes sounds cooler than faggy rotor-bird that dies in winter. But forgive my language. But
I like this has given me a mental image of like a cultural anthropology text, but instead of being like dry academic language, it's like, the Norse people figured out that, their gods were all fags. And so they just found new gods who were super cool, from a Jim Bro perspective.
And the Hittites were these like really cool guys. Like if you ever read the letters of Hittites, it sounds very Nordic. They're like when the sea people start invading, they're constantly yelling at each other, "Stop being cowards and fight, you freaking it's explicitive." There's a lot of linguistic, almost Norse-sounding culture with the Hittites. It's kind of interesting. And like different neo-pagans would claim that this is the Hittites are Indo-European. It makes sense that the elites fleeing the collapse of the Hittite Empire would go along the trade routes north and find their way to the Northlands and come to rule this place. In fact, this is somewhat even referenced in some biblical literature. In the Book of Enoch, it's said that Enoch traveled north to preach to the men there, and essentially, like, Enoch being one of the people living in that region, the northern region, such as the Hittites, it makes sense. Like, essentially retelling of the story of the Hittite elites fleeing north from the sea people. But there's this really fascinating history there. And, I would love to create a history, and this is, I do think this is a kind of a Christian tradition. Christians oftentimes have not disgraced the local traditions, but rather try to humanize them, and like describe them in a way that is parallel to the biblical texture, the biblical text. Of like different saints that would chop down Odin's oak and stuff like that. Yeah, that's one way to do it. But then you also have Saint Columb, who would essentially meditate with Druids, learn their culture, and try to Christianize it. And I would argue the attempt to Christianize the culture tends to be more fruitful than chopping down trees. Even though chopping down Thor's oak is pretty based, but the Druids that Saint Columb converted, they became some of the first booksmiths of Europe, and the books that they wrote saved Europe from the Dark Ages, really. Sorry, I've been talking for a while now.
No, not at all. It's interesting. Someone in chat briefly, I just saw it go by, that basically said that you had some of the widest interest of anyone on the internet, and I largely agree. Yeah. Like, I could just kind of listen to you talk, and so I've been in rapt attention.
Yeah, I don't like the fact that I'm so wide ranging, because I prefer depth to breadth. What's the phrase? I prefer depth to girth. Is that the phrase they say?
I was not going there, but you mentioned it.
Most of these people in the chat probably know about my crazy adventures of biohacking during the pandemic and my attempt at a PhD there. But I do try to keep my interests fresh. This year's interests appear to be AI, art, propaganda, and history, so I'll keep with that for a while.
Yeah, and people should, if people want to find you, where should they look? Because your art is of the highest quality. I mean, such high quality that I use it. So it's really the best that money can buy, in the sense that I didn't pay you.
Yeah, the Restoration Bureau is where I posted. I guess I'll just put it in chat, in the private chat. That's why I'm posting it right now. I also posted to my Twitter. A lot of people don't like my hot takes on politics on Twitter. So if you want to avoid my hot takes on Twitter, just go to the Telegram and follow that for the art. It's got 4,000 followers now. Holy crap! I guess I proved
you're popping off.
Prude did a shout out to it. Thank you, Prude, and it bounced up about 100 more followers. I wasn't expecting it 4,000 already. Prude did a funny. I think the art I did 2 nights ago. I'm trying to do a piece of art every night, just as a quick like way to like. It's more of a stress relief for me. But I'm trying to do one every night. I've only missed one when I was sick with a stomach flu and I couldn't use the computer because I was on the toilet the whole day. But yeah, so far I've been pretty consistent doing a piece. My goal is to do a single piece every day for a year, and then maybe I'll retire it and get bored with it. I don't know. But I'll link it in the private chat. You can put it in. Yeah, you put it in the
it's in chat so people can find it. And I'll add it to the description as well because look, you talked for me for like an hour and a half. So it's the least I could do. It.
Is there someone waiting so I can get out here?
No. I'm almost done because look, like this is my longest stream by like a factor of 2 at this point. But you've got to come back on because we need to talk about
the three body problem. Yeah. I'll also post my Substack because there's a lot of 3 body stuff on there that I babble about.
I hate to say it. I'm really embarrassed. I actually didn't know you had a Substack until the last time we spoke. And I was like, oh shit, I guess that I should get up on that.
I do try to keep it on the wraps because sometimes I write really good and sometimes I don't got it. I do get writer's block, and then I just like the last thing I wrote about, I was trying to compare Elon. I was basically saying the right wing's been looking for someone to cross the Rubicon, and in comes Elon Musk crossing the Rhine, this like barbarian king conquering part of the empire. And I kind of want to develop this more. I wanted to release something on the thought first, but I want to develop it more than what I wrote. If there's a way to like differentiate decline or consolidation, like Rhine crosses versus Rubicon crosses. The right wing seems obsessed with people that cross the Rubicon, but no one ever does. And they keep ignoring the people that cross the Rhine, even though they're doing the most amount of work.
Right. All right, so guys, I'm gonna kind of wrap this up. I figure if you guys want to send questions or anything, just drop it in chat. And sorry, Fortnite Battle Pass. I can't read that. That's not in traditional English. So it's been.
Yeah, I don't know.
Sorry, it's been 3 hours. I'm not the best at reading anyway, and that took me a couple of attempts. But if you guys want to drop questions in chat, as we kind of roll over the 3 hour mark, I'll answer it. Yeah, man. Thank you for talking for so long. This is incredibly interesting.
Yeah, I ran out of wine and water about half an hour ago, so I got a dry mouth.
I ran out of water at when Oros was talking, and that was a while ago.
Yeah, I'm gonna head out because I gotta make some art for today and then go do my nightly run so I don't get fat as fuck during the pandemic. But
well, fair enough, man. All right, I'll talk to you later.
See you. Bye.
All right, guys. So like I said, if you want to, drop questions in chat, I'm about to wrap this thing up, but I'd, happy to stay if you guys want to ask questions. You don't need to pay for it. You can just, type it in chat. And if not, you know what? We'll wrap it up just at 3 hours. So yeah, like I said at the beginning, I've been trying to, focus more on the audio stuff. So I, invested a little bit in the setup, and, probably what's going to happen is I'm going to have to pick a more regular schedule. I'll probably put a poll out. I am new. Should I subscribe? Yes, Fortnite Battle Pass. You should subscribe. This is not what I normally do. I normally have a hour-long interview show 2-3 times a week. So you can go back into the backlog and see. I just spoke to Pete Quinones, which I think was a pretty good episode. We got into it, pretty in depth on Pete's personal history. I've also got a lot of stuff with Thomas 777, a lot of the names in these spheres. And you can find that. This is really a convenient excuse to shill. You can find that both on YouTube, and also you can find all my stuff on Apple and Spotify if you want to listen to it on the go. It's a little more convenient. But yeah, I just did this because I had, no one was in town. I just got back from, my family Christmas, and, it was, yeah, Volpes, you've got the right idea. You definitely should subscribe if you meet those. Burden is usually much more sensible. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. See, I can't hide when it's just me talking for 3 hours, so I can kind of put on an act of being, someone who actually knows what they're doing, when it's me responding 3 times to Thomas over the course of an hour. But when it's just me, you just hear the fact that I'm an 85 IQ, shambling retard. All right, guys. I guess this is right at the 3-hour mark, which is really, I did not think this was going to go on for so long. This was a fun stream. I enjoy talking to you guys. I like to do these every, month or so because Blackwater. Jay Burden, can you talk about the 3-body problem for a second? What's interesting to you about it? So what's interesting to me about it is that I read the first one when it kind of first came out, when it was kind of like a shit lip sensation, like Obama, read it. And the first book out of the 3 was interesting, but not all that great, because essentially it's an interesting, like, kind of first contact story. It's from a Chinese perspective. It talks about the Cultural Revolution, which is kind of interesting. But the second book, and I won't spoil it, is, I think, exceptional. It gets into very kind of like deep game theory stuff, and it's fascinating. The third one is probably my least favorite, but you kind of need it to read the story. So I'd recommend it if you're a fan of kind of like high conceptual sci-fi. It is hard sci-fi, so you have to sit through some, a little bit of like Reddit tier science, which is not terrible, and the book moves pretty quickly. So I'd recommend it. It's very literary for sci-fi. I think that sci-fi is probably the first good sci-fi after the Cold War, and I'll put it that way. K. Lewis, why are converts to Catholicism more pesky than those born to a sect? I mean, that's an old thing, right? The zeal of the convert is that essentially, people are looking for, it's the same thing with CrossFitters or anything else, right? That, people are looking for something, they're looking for a big change. And when they find something that, has solved their problems and has filled that void, they become, they evangelize for it. And I think for a lot of people, like the people who make those radical transformations, like the people who become traditional Catholics, who, uproot their lives like that, they tend to be radicals, especially with young guys, and so I think that that's basically, what explains it. Well, all right, guys, if there's nothing else in the next, couple seconds, I'll drop out. I appreciate you guys coming out and sticking with me for so long. I realize I've been talking forever. But like I said, I'll drop a link for Luthemplar, for Cringewalker, my stuff. You can find it everywhere. And I'll have a new episode coming out with a guy who wrote an interesting article about Trump. It's more, I guess, I don't know, it's more confrontational than a lot of my stuff, but it's interesting, and I hope you guys get something out of it that should come out in the next couple of days. I've got a lot of people, down the pipe coming on, a lot of people interested in, appearing on the show. So, stick around. It should be getting better, hopefully pretty quickly, because, I do want to put some, time and effort into this. All right, guys, thanks for coming out. I appreciate it. Talk to you later.